I have 5 o'clock. Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our second meeting in April of the Fish and Wildlife Board. First thing we will do tonight is we will introduce ourselves. My name is Brad Ferlin, and I'm chair of the Fish and Wildlife Board. We'll start over here on the left and go around the table.
Paul Noel, Orleans County.
Richard Craigland, Wild County.
Bob Patterson, Madison County.
I'm Wingrid.
Martin Van Buren, Rutland County.
Again, Brad Ferlin, Caledonia County.
Neil Hogan, Bennington County.
Nick Burnham, Windsor County.
Jeffrey Corey, Franklin County.
Don Bellson Jackmo, Washington County.
And online,
David Dean, Wyndham County.
Linda Hook, Essex County.
okay, welcome, everybody. Commissioner, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, thank you. Good evening. My name is Andrea Shortsleeve, interim commissioner for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And let's go through the staff who's present. We'll start with John Austin.
Hello, everybody. John Austin, the Director of the Wildlife Division.
Nick Horton here in Moose Project.
Margaret Murphy, Fish Program Manager.
Eric Palmer, Director of the Fish Division.
Judd Croucher, Fisheries Biologist. Dustin Stedman, Director of the Warden Service.
Hannah Smith, General Counsel.
Sean Fowler, Major for the Warden Service.
David Sawsville, Program Manager for Wildlife Management.
John Hall, Outreach.
And online, excuse me, what was that? John? John Hall, okay.
And
John Hall and Megan Dooney with Outreach also.
Great. Well, welcome, everyone from the department. First item on the agenda tonight is the approval of the minutes from our April 9th meeting.
I make the motion, we accept it.
I have a motion to accept the
second
minutes and a second. Any comments or any other changes, recommended changes? Any changes, I should say? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes as presented signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay. The next item on the agenda is public comments. And it looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 individuals tonight for public comments. And just a reminder, I'm going to ask everybody if they want to stand up at the podium up front. That way we can see, the board can see it, and it'll also be presented to people that are online. This is 2 minutes to speak about anything you want. And it's not a debate back and forth. It's just a chance to provide your public comments on something to the board. So with that said, we will start with Evan Lawrence from Newberry.
Thank you. Just gonna do a little quick pass around here if you don't mind.
And I'll just remind everybody, it's 2 minutes, and I'm going to set my timer. So if you hear the buzzing going off, that's your cue.
My school teacher background here, huh? There'll be a quiz on this later, so you just took a minute. For you folks online, what I'm asking and requesting is that when you come up to look at your second vote for the Fish and Wildlife regulations for fishing, that you modify the current regulation to remove 122 to eliminate the proposed changes to inland waters regulations for panfish. Also asking to eliminate 123, the proposed regulation that would prohibit the sale of crappie. Basically, what I'm asking for is just to sort of help you answer a question. You know, why are you here? Why are you regulating? Why are you imagining that things will be better or worse with the regulation? I've looked carefully at the panfish regulation in particular and identified that this is a department that takes in a lot of data, has a lot of science available to it. I actually watched a video on Facebook this week of folks on a lake measuring panfish out of a lake. You know, everyone was celebrating the good work they do in Fish and Wildlife, which I do as well. But this proposal is very lazy. It has no data, has no science in it that says you're going to start at this level, This new lake regulation is going to bring you to a new and better level. There's nothing like that in this proposal. Instead, they're saying, well, there's 400 people on Facebook who have this idea, and we're going to please them, and maybe we'll have this regulation change. But if you look carefully at the data, you won't find it. Nothing that says you'll have better fishing on Lake Iroquois, or Lake Dunmore is going to benefit, or Lake St. Catherine is going to benefit. There's nothing on there that says there are going to be improvements made. I think that's vital. Your job is to be, scientific minded. You're not maybe all scientists, but you want to see the department present good evidence, and they're not doing it. And they're doing it for social reasons, which they don't say very loudly. But I would just like you to consider that I need, two of you, one of you to have a motion and another to have a second to have a sincere discussion about this issue and throw it out. And I'd appreciate that. Thanks so much.
Next, we have Brenda Nancy from Doe. Next, Fred Schroeder, I believe, from Bristol. Is that correct, Fred?
Hi, I'm Fred Schroeder from Bristol. And Brenna's not here. She stepped out. But if she were here, she would be talking about being in favor for the proposed panfish rules. For you tonight. You see, Ms. Galdensi is the head of Protect Our Wildlife, Vermont's very own anti-hunting and anti-trapping organization. You may wonder why she would vote for proposed rules. Well, her group, Protect Our Wildlife, does not believe in science-based decisions, but rather emotions. The group supported Senate Bill 258 and led the charge in the attempt to dismantle the Fish and Wildlife Board last year. This attempt would have removed your oversight of proposed fish and wildlife rulemaking. Thankfully, S258 lacked support and was dropped from the legislature. So here we are tonight with your vote at hand. You, the Fish and Wildlife decide tonight whether the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department's panfish team has proven to you beyond a reasonable doubt that proposed panfish regulations are actually needed. Whether they have conducted exhaustive studies of panfish populations in Vermont's lakes, and whether petitions on Facebook are significant enough to change statewide rules, and whether the small family-run businesses who buy fish on Vermont and New York will be hurt by these proposed rules. The truth is, the panfish team has collected very little data on panfish throughout the state. It was even revealed at the public comment meeting in St. Albans. The panfish team had no knowledge that bluegills existed in Sheldon Pond, a major panfish pond in Vermont. Yes, bluegills have been in Sheldon Pond. You may think I'm anti-fish and wildlife department, but to the contrary, I simply support data-driven decisions because in these times, hunting, trapping, and fishing are under attack from animal rights groups like Protect Our Wildlife. But their efforts to cancel traditional uses of Vermont's wildlife, fish and wildlife are rarely beat by sound scientific research. I ask you tonight to vote based on science, not emotions. Do not pass the proposed panfish.
Thank you. Next, I have Fritz Pritchard, but I'm not sure that you choose. Okay. Rob Coronado from Orange.
Happy spring, everybody. Rod Coronado from Sage Mountain Botanical Sanctuary and Town of Orange. I want to first acknowledge the accomplishment of lake trout recovery and thank the Fish Division for their work. I think the decades-long effort to restore the lake trout is worth supporting by all stakeholders who support fish and wildlife. And I think that it's the direction we all want to go in. I'm hoping that with that less time focused on lake trout, we can see more efforts for lake sturgeon and other endangered fish. Excuse me. Following along that, one of the things that I do believe is a threat to fish and wildlife, and I see this echoed with the North American Mountain Wildlife Conservation, is the commercial sale of fish and wildlife. I very much support Appendix 123 that would prohibit the sale of black and white crappie. I think that, I've been to the meetings here. I heard the presentations, heard from the warden service. I heard from recreational fishermen that this is impacting them. And I just want to remind the board that that is our mission. That is your mission. The department's mission is protecting fish and wildlife for the people of Vermont, not for those who are buying fish out of state or selling them out of state. And for me, I know that Vermont has other fish and wildlife that is up for sale, and I'm not really happy about that either, but I am very much in support of the department putting a limit on this because we don't know what the impacts are of selling fish commercially in Vermont. I think that those are resources that are best available for Vermonters. Thank you.
Okay, next up, I have Dennis Fournier from Williamstown.
Yes, my name is Dennis Fournier from Williamstown, Vermont. Yes, I would like to offer my full support to the petition submitted to the board as written by Bert Saldy to extend the late muzzleloading season by 5 days for a total of 14 days. And I would appreciate simply if the board would just, consider my support for that petition. Thank you very much.
Okay, anybody else, public comments that we don't have on the sheet at this point? Anybody online, public comments? Okay, seeing none or hearing none? Thank you, everybody. Next item on the agenda is the 2025 antlerless deer permits and youth season, preliminary approvals. I'll let you introduce that for us.
Great. I will just hand it over to our Deer and Moose project leader, Nick Fortin.
I will. Obviously, we're here to talk about this year's antlerless permit recommendation. A few things I want to go through. Usually I try to give some sort of little lesson on a piece of this process, kind of the background to how we come up with these recommendations. But since a lot of you are kind of unprecedented amount of you going through this for the first time, I'm going to touch on a bunch of stuff, not really dive into any one thing. Before I do that, I want to make it very clear that this process of setting antlerless permits and how many antlerless deer we're going to take this fall is entirely separate from the rule change process that we are going through, right? We're going to hopefully we'll take a first vote tonight and approve permits in May in the middle of this larger rulemaking process that we're going through on deer hunting regulations. That's confusing to anybody. It's going to be really confusing for the public, but we need to be clear that these are two very separate processes. Tonight, we're just talking about our 2025 antlerless harvest recommendation. We're not talking about hunting regulations that we presented earlier, that we've already had hearings on, that we'll have more hearings on. Not talking about that tonight. So, nice lesson. How we estimate deer numbers and how we kind of come up with how many antlerless deer should we take. So I'm not going to go through all of our models in any sort of real detail, but I want you to kind of understand what they are and how they work. So one of the primary models we use is called a sex age kill model, widely used by a lot of states. We use a modified version. The premise of this is that basically, theory, if our harvest was totally representative of our population, right? If hunters killed deer just exactly proportional to how they're out there, you could totally rebuild a population just based on what hunters kill. Obviously, our harvest is not exactly representative of what is out there, right? So that's where ours is modified. But general premise is we know the buck harvest, right? We know how many bucks are killed. And if we can estimate the buck harvest rate, or what percentage of all bucks that are out there are killed by hunters each year, then we know how many bucks were out there. We can estimate that reasonably accurately from age data. We know exactly what the total mortality is. And from tracking it over time, we have a pretty good idea of what percentage of bucks are taken by hunters, what percentage of all the bucks out there are taken by hunters each year. So basically, this is just using the buck harvest. Okay, now we know how many bucks there were. This is sort of walking through that. If we knew that our harvest rate was 50%, right? Hunters killed 50% of the bucks that were out there. Take your harvest, divide by 50% or multiply by 2, get the number of bucks that are out there, right? You can then get the number of does by multiplying the number of bucks times the sex ratio. We can get sex ratio from age structure data. A little, maybe seems a little confusing, but, and I'm not going to get into the weeds, but from age structure, if we have the age structure of bucks and the age structure of does, we can determine the sex ratio. So we can actually measure that pretty accurately. That gives us the number of does. And you need to know the number of fawns per doe. We know the number that are born in the spring. Kind of have to guess at how many are alive still in the fall. That's actually the hardest part to estimate. But then if you have bucks and does and fawns, you have population estimate, right? That's how many deer are out there. And so we're doing this looking back, right? We need to have the harvest already. So we're looking back at last fall. How many deer did we have out there? It's pretty reliable. Another model we use is just a basic age-based reconstruction model. This is sort of the premise here is like someone shoots a 3-year-old buck this year. The buck clearly was alive last year as a 2-year-old and the year before as a 1-year-old. And so in that way, we can add back through time. And it's not great in the current year, but if we look back 4, 5, 6 years, when most of the bucks have been killed already, we know how many bucks were out there at that time. You have to account for some non-hunting mortality, but it works pretty well, right? You just add back. You can say, okay, 3 years ago, we had at least X number of bucks. Like I said, it's not great in the current year, but this is a really reliable way for us to sort of check how close we were in the past. And this is kind of how we proof our models. Working on fine-tuning this one because it's a lot more accurate. We know most bucks end up dying by a hunter at some point. 90+% of them eventually are killed by a hunter. So it's a great way to account for what is out there on the landscape. And so once we know what's out there, then we have to project forward, right? We are trying to base our harvest on what's going to be out there this coming fall. Not what was out there last year, but how many are there going to be this coming fall? How many do we want there to be after that? So if we know what there was last fall, we know how many were removed in the harvest, right? And I should add, we track the doe population for this portion. Seems weird. We do the buck population to figure out how many there were, and then we track the doe population forward. The reason we do that is the doe population is much more stable. Right? It's most of the population, the total number of deer, and it's much more stable. Bucks, just because so many of them are young, you can get a lot of variation year to year. Does are much more stable. We track does. So we know the number harvested. We can reliably estimate the number of non-hunting mortality that die from that. And then of course you have births in the spring. Your fawns become adults, make new fawns, and then there's some summer mortality. Obviously, we're estimating all of these non-hunting mortalities, right? And most of them we can do pretty reliably. The most challenging one by far is that summer fawn mortality. That can vary quite a bit year to year, and we have no way of, we know the range and we know what the average is, but I can't tell you now if summer fawn mortality this coming summer is going to be higher or lower than normal, right? I know what the average is, and so that's what we plan on. But so this is seems complex, but there's simple math here, right? You're just working this out going forward. So just to get a sense of, I've shown this before. Anyone who's been here more, if this isn't your first time, you've seen this. But just to get a sense of how many deer we actually need to kill to keep a deer population stable, right? We have our population of 100 does. We know the age structure. So on average, we're close to 25% of our does are 1.5 years old. 20 to 25%, depending where you are in the state. But so that's our age structure. That number of does produces 165 fawns. Right? We can approximate that half of those survive the summer. That's pretty standard, but that is an approximation. That's the part that can vary quite a bit and matters, but we have no way of really predicting that. The part we do know, because of age structure, is how many survive to 1 year old, which is 50. The reason I know it's 50 is because half of those 50 are female, and those females become my yearlings in my doe population the next year. So in a stable population, tracking this over time, stable, we have 25 female fawns that become your 25 yearlings. But in order for your population to stay stable, that means you need to remove 25 of the deer you had. Otherwise, you're going to end up with 125 deer. So you have to remove 25% of your doe population. And these are rough. Like, depends where you are in the state. This is probably a little more productive part of the state, but 25% of your doe population to keep it stable. Deer are productive creatures. I did want to touch on before I get into that. So another really important caveat here. So, okay, we're 25% is what we're going for, right? Obviously, most of that is non-hunting mortality in most of Vermont. That's like winter mortality, what we would call winter, but it's everything other than hunting. Maybe on average, this is like 10% hunting and the rest is non-hunting. We have a hard winter, more non-hunting mortality. Maybe there's 30% of your does die, right? So now you have 30 spots for your 25 potential fawns. But the key is a hard winter is also going to affect how many fawns you have to recruit. In fact, it has more impact on the number of fawns that are coming in than it does on the adult population. So now you have 30 spots and maybe you only have 15 fawns coming in to fill those spots. So a hard winter has a pretty substantial impact. We bumped our total adult doe mortality up to 30% with hunting. Right? We took another 5% to hunting. That has no impact on our fawn. Yes, there are fawns in antlerless harvest, but if you actually did the math here, it's 0.4 of one of those fawns. So basically none. So yes, you'd be 5% fewer. You'd have an extra hole, but you'd still be 5 fawns coming in. So hunting has way less impact if we're kind of trying to figure out what our total mortality needs to be. If we're doing it from hunting, it's a lot less impactful than if we're letting to do it. To complicate that even more, just to emphasize that this is not a 1 + 1 = 2 sort of math thing. If our hunting mortality is 10% and we, on average, our non-hunting mortality is 15%, like, oh, that's 25% total mortality. Except just mathematically, it's only 23%. And the reason for that is the order of these things happening, right? Hunting happens and then that non-hunting, mostly winter, happens. So if we remove 10% of our deer through hunting, we only have 90 left. Those 90 experience a 15% mortality, but 15% of 90 is 13.5. So you end up with that. The other challenge here is what we call compensatory mortality, which is we can't account for, but we know happens. And that's where by removing deer, the remaining deer survive better, right? We all know this happens. It's a well-established ecological principle, but we don't know like what the extent of that is. But it may well be that in order to actually get 25% total mortality, if we have 15% non-hunting, we might need to remove 15% of our deer from through hunting as well. And so it's not, 1 + 1 = 2, it's 1 + 1 = 1.5. So this is a little more complicated than it might seem on the face. And there's this sort of built-in buffer that makes it pretty much impossible to overharvest deer. Very serious about that. Last thing I want to touch on before I get into the actual recommendation is sort of the issue that we hear a lot about management units, and they're all too big. So when we estimate deer numbers, we're doing it for each wildlife management unit. That's the scale we manage deer at. We have our imaginary wildlife management unit. Based on all the things I showed you, all the harvest data, all the other information we know, we can estimate the total number of deer in that unit. But that's what we're estimating. We're estimating a total number of deer in that WMU. We're not estimating the density. figure out the density by dividing that total number by the size of the unit. The amount of deer habitat in the unit. So if this is a 100 square mile unit with 2,000 deer, that's 20 deer per square mile. That's how we come up with our density estimate. But of course, deer are not distributed like this, right? They're distributed more like this and probably even more clustered than that. And so what someone might experience in that WMU may be very different from what we estimate. There might be square miles with very few deer. There might be square miles with far more deer than we've estimated. The issue, if we try to divide things up more, is that one, a lot of the state would probably look like this, and there's no clear way to divide that into smaller pieces, right? That's going to make managing anything better. The other challenge is if we divide things up smaller, say I need, right now, you know, in an ideal world, we get at least 10 like yearling bucks a year to get our health measures, our antler size, our body weights. If I need at least 10 a year now, and I divide this unit in half, I need 10 a year from each half. If I divide it in 4, I need 10 from every one of those subunits to get any meaningful data. We cannot collect more data than we do now. We just don't have the capacity. In a lot of cases, there aren't enough deer killed for us to get that amount of data. So we really can't manage at a smaller scale. The other piece is all those parameters we need to estimate to figure out how many deer there are and how many deer there might be in the future. Things like the buck harvest rate, that non-hunting mortality. Those things vary a lot once you start getting to really small scales and not in a predictable way. So we can predict them pretty accurately and they're pretty consistent year to year at a WMU level. But if you start getting down smaller, the variability from year to year and the influence of, you know, predation or vehicle mortality or, you know, winters can be significantly different. Birth rates can be different. Hunter harvest rates can be different. So all of those things make it pretty much impossible for us to manage at any smaller scale than we do. And in fact, there are some WMUs that we really pretty much guessing at now. Don't have enough data. So just want to make that clear. I know everyone will hear from hunters regularly, you know, we need to have smaller WMUs. Vermont has an incredibly variable landscape. Like our habitat varies a lot over short distances, habitat quality for deer. We're always going to have this problem. Just have to accept that. We manage at a broad scale. We kind of let hunters figure out that the fine details, and believe it or not, they actually do a really good job. Hunters do a really good job of taking deer where there are deer, as long as they have access. We have no control over it, of course. Okay, on to our actual recommendation. Hopefully you've all had a chance to at least skim through the document. I'm going to cover the kind of broad statewide big picture stuff. And then if anyone has questions on a specific WMU, I'm happy to answer those. So again, we manage deer at the level of a wildlife management unit, not at the statewide level. Statewide numbers not really relevant for most of our management, although I am going to show some generalized ones here. But each WMU has its own deer density objective. That's the number we think is sustainable. We think at that level we can have healthy deer and healthy forests, healthy deer habitat. We are most concerned about the health, right? So we have these physical condition thresholds as well. Those are more important than the density. Like the density was our best, as wildlife management professionals, our best estimate of what we think will maintain healthy deer and healthy habitats. But those physical condition thresholds are minimums, right? They're not targets. But those are kind of hard evidence. If we see our deer condition drop below those, we know we have a problem. We know we have more deer than our habitat can support. The reason some of these vary is, you know, these are all set at levels that we have maintained in these WMUs in the past. Some WMUs have never been as high as others, the deer aren't as big as others. But they're all set at levels we know we can maintain. So if we see physical condition drop below that, we know we have a problem. Broadly, I generalize for the entire state. This is yearly antler beam diameter. We continue to see this long-term downward trend. And no evidence we've stopped it in recent years either, unfortunately. So we're continuing to see that. It's not related to deer numbers, at least at a large scale. Deer numbers statewide have been pretty stable past 25 years that we actually have hard estimates. It's all about habitat, right? We just can't support the number of deer we used to. A lot of our habitat in Vermont is relatively mature. So about 80% of what we consider deer habitat is forest. The health of our forests drives how many deer we can have pretty much everywhere except like parts of the Champlain Valley. But everywhere else, we're mostly forested, and that's what drives it. We have a lot of relatively mature, even age forests that might as well be a desert for a deer. There's nothing for them to eat. There's no cover. We lack young forest habitat, and that contributes significantly to how many deer we can sustain. Right, that young habitat, tons of food for deer, tons of cover, just supports orders of magnitude more, but many times more deer. You know, you might be talking like enough food for 40 deer per square mile in a young forest habitat, and enough food for 1 to 2 deer per square mile. Sure, even age forest. Big difference there. Okay, so how are we doing this year? We had a normal winter here. The extent that any winter is ever normal. It was really hard for 6 weeks, but only for 6 weeks. And largely the thing that determines how deer survive a winter is the length of winter, the amount of time they are confined to a deer yard. Doesn't really matter how bad it is during that time. It's the length of time, right? They have fat reserves. They can hunker down and deal with really bad weather for a little while. But if they're stuck in a deer yard for, the general rule of thumb is 90 days or more, you start to see significant mortality. They were really only confined for 6 to maybe 7, 8 weeks, depending where you were. That's not even close to 90 days. So we got up to average. That's all we did. We're used to the really easy winters we've had, but we got up to average. Now, it was a little harder, as it always is, in northern Vermont, north central Vermont. So we have accounted for a little impact up there, you know, compared to our recent averages. The worst place I would say probably was WMUC. So many of you probably, like Jay Peak was one of the snowiest places in the country this year, right? They had a lot of snow in the northern greens. So we're expecting some impacts in the northern greens and a little bit in the Northeast Kingdom, but nothing abnormal. And frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if the actual impact is less than what we're predicting. We're basing it on, you know, our equations, which are based on years of data. So we're trying to be objective, but if I had to guess, I'm going to say it was probably less impactful than what the numbers would suggest. But here's how those densities pan out. And this is a lot on one slide, I know, but basically 24 and 25 look almost the same. Most WMUs, you're talking like 1 deer per square mile difference, which frankly is in our margin of error for estimating deer numbers. The only one that work on the screen. The only one is C that dropped more than 1 deer per square mile but it was well above objective. So, you know, not, unfortunately, I have to sit here and say that's not a bad thing. No, I prefer deer didn't starve to death in the winter. So when it all comes down to it, we come up with this map that says, you know, all of these red units, we have more than 2 deer per square mile, more than our objective. We are that far above our objective. The reason we keep that 2 deer per square mile thing is because that's our margin of error. What we figure in our models, we could be off by that much. But frankly, I don't, sort of an arbitrary threshold. Some areas we're more accurate than that. But so these are the places where we definitely have too many deer. But since I've been doing this is my 10th antlerless harvest recommendation, I thought it'd be interesting to look back over the last 10 years. And I will caveat these that we introduced a new management plan halfway through this process, right? So our target population, our objectives for some WMUs changed 5 years ago. But if I look back over the last 10 years, how many years have each WMU been above objective over the past 10 years, above our current objective? By 2 deer per square mile, or by more than 2 deer per square mile on the left, or by any amount on the right. And the reason I wanted to show this is because we have a lot of WMUs where we're close, right? We're near our objective. But every single year we're above. We're just close enough that we don't flag it red on that previous map. Good example is like, Southern Connecticut River Valley. It's only been about 2 deer or more above once in the last 10 years, but 9 of those 10 years, it's been above its target of 15. So yes, there's our estimates are not perfect, but it's really consistently at 16 deer per square mile. And our goal is 15. So, it's one of those places where I guess what I want to emphasize here is what this suggests to me is we have room to be more aggressive with our antlerless harvest. Right? We are clearly not pushing your numbers down. We're not even reaching objective in most areas. But even when we quote unquote reach objective, meaning we're close, we're still not really getting there, right? We're doing this right. We should see on the map on the right, we should see 5s. Half the time we're a little bit below objective, half the time we're a little bit above objective, but we're fluctuating right around our target. There aren't many WMUs where we're achieving that. Again, this will be a lot more meaningful the end of our 10-year planning period where we've had a full 10 years under our current objectives and current strategies, but I think it's informative now just to emphasize that we can push harder without hurting anything. Last thing, again, a lot of you are new. I want to kind of go through the process here because this is not all about antlerless permits, right? We come up with a target antlerless harvest for every wildlife management unit. This is the number of antlerless deer we want to take. And then the ways we get to that, so you guys actually have control over 3 things. First is archery antlerless harvest, right? Any archery hunter in Vermont can shoot antlerless deer. They can shoot up to 4 if they want to keep buying licenses. But you have the authority to turn that off in a by WMU. You can say in WMU, whatever, no archery antlerless harvest. No reason to do that, but you could, right? But it's on or off. There's no, oh, you can only take 1 antlerless deer with archery. You either can or you can't. That's all you have control over. But that rarely, in fact, that never achieves our target antlerless harvest in any WMU, archery alone. The other piece is the youth and novice season, right? Any youth hunter can take any deer. But again, have the authority to say legal bucks only. So, and I say legal bucks only. So what you actually have authority to say with youth weekend is the way the statute is written. Youth hunter can take legal buck, or if you allow them to take antlerless deer, they can take any deer. So it's either any deer, antlerless deer, and no antler restrict, or they have to follow antler restrictions. There's no in between there. But again, it's always been any deer. It's a tiny part of our antlerless harvest, and in no WMU do we even approach our total target with even these 2 seasons. The reason I say that, even in like WMUE, where I didn't recommend any antlerless permits, we could issue antlerless permits there, wouldn't do a damn thing, wouldn't decrease deer numbers. But it's sort of, you're more managing hunter expectations at that point, at that very low antlerless harvest. We allow opportunity in these 2 seasons. We could issue some small number of antlerless permits. It wouldn't make a difference. But it tends to rile up hunters for no real benefit. So that's kind of why we don't in some units, or we issue very small numbers in some units. But there's no unit where we're like, ooh, we're killing too many deer with just archery and youth. Maybe we need to cut back. Doesn't happen. And then the last part is the antlerless permits. And this is the part we can really fine tune, right? We can determine exactly how many antlerless permits we want to issue in each WMU. Last thing I would say, before wrapping up here, I would ask you, even though we're not talking about the regulation changes tonight, but if you kind of think about how this might all work next year, if all these regulation changes proposed pass, how we might go through this process next year, it would look exactly the same. The only difference would be, we'd be figuring out exactly what success rate we want to use for antlerless permits, because you'd be able to use them in rifle season. But otherwise, this process is exactly the same. So the three things you are approving, giving preliminary approval tonight. Our recommendation is archery season open to antlerless deer, taking of antlerless deer in all WMUs, as it has been for several years now. Youth and novice season open to taking one deer of either sex, including any buck. So as it has been forever in all WMUs, and then issuing a total of 23,400 antlerless permits, WMU specific antlerless permits distributed as shown on the map there. These are the items. There's also, of course, in the document, in multiple places. And the last thing I want to say is just the timeline, just so we're clear on this. Presentation and hopefully preliminary approval tonight. We have 2 public hearings scheduled in a couple weeks. The 6th, which is a Tuesday in Winooski, and the 8th, I guess this is next week. And then the 8th in Springfield, which is Thursday. Again, that the recommendation document will be online. And we'll take, of course, public comments by email, as we always do. And then there will be a final vote on this, the one really vote that matters, at the May 21st meeting. I will add for the public comment period, because it may seem short turnaround this time, and this meeting is a little later than normal, so it sort of is. We take comment on this beginning at our March hearings, but there's actually a lot of comments that have been ostensibly on the deer rule changes that really relate more to this, that you will see when you see the summarized comments. So we have been taking comment on this essentially since we started the deer rule change process. So there has been a longer comment period than this would suggest. And then I guess with that, I'll leave this up, and I will answer any questions that I try to.
The question about the 23,400 antlerless permits, how many landowner permits are issued out of that number?
I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. It is in the harvest report each year.
The hundreds or thousands?
It's less than 1,000.
1,000, okay.
It varies a lot by WMU. Some WMUs it's single digits, and some of the northern like B and D1, it's maybe 100 people. Yeah, Beth.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier, in previous meetings, the fill rate for the antlerless permits is not very high,
It's about 14%.
14%. So I guess I'm trying to figure out, okay, we have all these antlerless permits, but only 14% of them are being filled. So there's no way you're gonna achieve your targets based on that.
In some WMUs, in most WMUs, yes, we can. We can still kill enough deer, but that's why we have to issue, we're issuing 2,000 permits in J2 and 2,000 permits in O, and we're gonna kill whatever that is, 200, not even 200 deer, 100 and something deer. But combined with the archery harvest, that gets us to our target in those units. In the Champlain Valley, we can't kill enough deer. That's the allocations in A, B, F1 and K are, I did change a couple of them, but we will not sell all, we won't even sell all those permits. And even if we did, probably still not as many antlerless deer as we should be taking. But those allocations are more reflective of just the limit of what we can sell, more than they are actually like to be taken.
I remember one of the things you told us over the years has been that if there's one thing that's predictable, is the fact that antlerless permit tags will get filled at 14-15% rate. And you know that, you can guarantee that kind of going into the future.
With very few exceptions, yes, it
That's
is.
why we issued 23,400 with the expectation that we're likely gonna get 3,000 deer.
Whatever it is, 3,700 and it's in the thing somewhere, but yeah.
Because we don't want 23,000 deer taken. We want 3,000 or whatever it is. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it takes a lot of permits to do it. And unfortunately, I mean, again, as I've touched on in the rule change process and why we feel we need to allow these permits to be used during rifle season, we don't have that many muzzleloader hunters. We might, in a good year, have exactly 23,000 active muzzleloader hunters. But of course, they're not distributed the way our permits are distributed. And so we end up with units where we're trying to give out permits to people who aren't there. Don't have enough muzzleloader hunters. We have plenty of hunters, not enough muzzleloader hunters.
The fill rate consistent year after year, year over year?
Yeah, I mean, it varies statewide. It varies like 1%. Either way, in any WMU, it might go 2%. You'll get a, thing, but it's pretty consistent. Yeah, it's actually one of those tables shows the table 3 maybe shows the success rates over time.
Important is that fund recruitment, Nick.
It's huge, but it's a part that we struggle to.
It seems like we're kind of high numbers compared to the Northeast.
Well, so again, like based on age structure, we know how many survived. But we know that 50% of the however many fawns were born, 50 of them are making it to a year because we know those are yearly that fall. And any Northeast state will have that number. It's the fall estimate where we're all guessing.
Yeah,
There's no way you can get it that, some folks will go do, or they'll ask hunters. But we actually have started asking hunters, what is our fawn to doe ratio, based on hunter sightings. And if we believed hunters, our deer population would have crashed years ago. It's something like 17 fawns per 100 does, which is not even possible given the number we know survive to a year, right? But that's what hunters tell us they see.
17 per 100.
Yeah, but it's because they're misidentifying. It's not the actual ratio. It can't be.
there any effort to help to improve the mature forests in the state? The department or the Agency of Natural Resources?
I mean, yeah, I would say broadly, we have in various forms, we have different, we are trying to increase the amount of young forests out there. We're also trying to increase the amount of old forests. We just want more diverse, healthier forests, which will all be better deer habitat. So yeah, we're in several different ways. I mean, I think as several folks in this room have said before, we would like to be doing more work on our land. We lack the capacity to actually do it, but it's important to keep in mind, we control such a minuscule part of deer habitat. It's mostly private. Yeah, much less influence on that. So need these kind of broader, higher up forces to really move that needle.
To speak to that we have we used to have 4 biologists and one sitting here now, but we have 3 biologists that work with private landowners to address habitat issues. We work with their partners in forest parks and recreation, like the county foresters who do a lot of technical outreach, consulting foresters who also do a lot of that work, and then with federal partners to improve habitat for wildlife on private lands. And a lot of that is increasing younger forests and diverse ages within that middle-aged forest that we have across the state.
Tangent, but because we're talking about it, is there any predictions on how this will change with rifle permits next year?
I think the main thing that would change is that number of permits will be a lot lower. But that
you guys haven't sat down and really.
No, I mean, I could do the math pretty quick, but if we're at 14% fill rate right now, and I would probably use 25% as I don't think we'll get that high, but as a conservative approach the first year, your numbers are all going to be, most of them will be 60%, 2/3 of what they are right there. So ballpark where those will all be. So it'd just be fewer permits. And obviously it's gonna depend on get a really hard winter next year. Then we're gonna be real conservative, which wouldn't, again, don't like hoping for hard winters, but that wouldn't be a terrible place to start from. Right? Be ultra conservative to start. I'd rather that than be in a place where like, man, we really need to kill more deer, but we have to be conservative because we have a new regulation. How it's gonna work. Like, that's a tougher place to be. Hopefully we just get a normal winter and we can just adjust these numbers based on what we think success rates will do.
Can I ask about N? You're showing 800, excuse me, 800 permits this year, and last year was 1,500.
1,500.
Why the big decrease?
As we've talked about, at the Bennington meeting, that population just hasn't been responding like we would expect it to. You know, even this year, I actually had to adjust our model output this year. Because every year for the past, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years, it says, oh, we should bump up. You know, we're at whatever, 19, 20 deer per square mile. The model's like, oh, it'll be 21. You should keep getting this jump. And it hasn't actually done that. So, I guess, not knowing what's causing that my guess is it's poor fawn recruitment. But because it hasn't been doing what we expect it to do, I'm just backing off being a little more conservative there.
David has a question online. David?
Yep. Thank you. Just this week, two experienced, respected foresters had a letter to the editor about overbrowse. And although they did in their letter call for support for the regulations as they are drafted at this time, I want to bring that issue up again. And for those that you don't know, WMU O, M, and Q are the areas that are of interest, particularly O. And I am glad to see the number is as high as it is. But my question to you is that overbrowse issue, has that been incorporated into the calculus that leads us to these numbers? Or are we, or is that just sort of outside of our area of interest? Because I know it is definitely of interest to the forestry folks here in Windham County.
Yeah, that's actually great question, David. So the answer is a bit of both. We don't directly incorporate browse impacts because frankly, there's no good way to measure it. And definitely not, it's so variable, and states have poured millions of dollars into trying to figure out some way you can go out and measure forest impacts and manage your deer based on that. And no one has come up with an answer yet. It's very complicated, but the way we do incorporate it, I would argue, is those physical condition metrics on our deer, right? If we have too many deer for our landscape, physical condition is going to decline. O is an interesting one where we're actually very slowly, but over the past 10 years, we've seen a slight improvement in our health of our deer in O. But I fully recognize that forest impacts are still widespread in that region. And that gets back to as the WMU example I showed earlier, and how, you know, the distribution of deer is so highly variable, right? Just, you're always, even if we're meeting our goals at the WMU level, you're always going to have pockets, higher deer density, where you see deer impacts to forest. There's no way for us, given the way we manage and the scale at which we manage, to address those fine scale impacts. The best we can do is provide opportunity for people to take antlerless deer, right? Ultimately, it comes down to a landowner wanting someone to come in and take deer. And as long as we have antlerless permits out there, we have antlerless harvest available on archery season, those tools are available, those options are available for landowners to remove deer if they feel it's happening. But essentially, we are putting the ball in the landowner's court. Kind of what we're trying to do.
And this is not a question specifically on the seasons and licenses that we're speaking of. But at some point, could the department, and not now, so that we can continue and finish this discussion, talk about having renewed the landowner invitation program to bring people onto their land in order to reduce the number of deer. The agency, the department was going to serve as a broker, stopped it, and then I was told that it had started again. And we can talk about that at a later time. Thank you.
So by not meeting the measurement objectives, that is happening one of two ways. If we used to meet them, I mean, that's how we've established those as our metrics. And so if those are what used to historically be achievable, then we have now too many deer on the landscape, or our habitat, quality of our habitat has decreased,
Well, I would argue both.
or both. And so my question is,
Too many is always relative to what your habitat can support.
Yep. So my question is, are you able to distinguish between the two?
No, but again, I don't think they're different things.
Yeah, right,
You know, I agree that I would argue that we know enough about our habitat in Vermont and how our landscape has changed to reasonably infer that that habitat quality for deer has declined over time, right? But we also know from measuring our deer that their health has declined, and that is simply the balance part. Okay, we used to be able to support whatever it is, 130,000 deer, and now we can only support 110,000. But the health is totally related to where we are relative to that habitat. Are we above it or below it? So I think both are true, right? Habitat quality has declined. Deer numbers may not have increased in a lot of areas, but we have more deer than our habitat can support in a lot of areas.
Any other questions for Nick?
So Nick, the metrics used to come up with archery antlerless beds and the metrics used for APRs is totally different.
I mean, so like antlerless permits, yeah, no, we're looking at how many deer are out there, and antler restrictions is a social regulation one, but we're also focused on our buck population.
Yeah, it's a total
Restrictions, yeah,
different metrics, really.
yeah, very different.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Can you put your proposals that, oh, that's what it is right there. Okay, that's exactly. So does anybody want to make a motion? Anybody heard enough to be able to vote for or against this proposal? Do I have any more questions? Ask for motions?
I'll make a motion to accept the department's recommendation on antlerless permits.
Second. As well as youth. Okay, and
Yes.
archery for all three, okay, all right.
Archery youth and permit allocation.
So I have a motion and a second on the table, to accept the, proposal of the departments. Take a vote, I will have a roll call vote. Robert Patterson,
Yes.
Neil Hogan,
Yes.
Allison Frazier is absent, Linda Hook,
Yes.
Jeff Corey,
Yes.
Beth Dimling,
Yes.
Richard, Craig,
Yes.
Brian Kilburn,
Yes.
Paul Noel,
Yes.
Artie Van Buren,
Yes.
John Valcian Giacomo,
Yes.
David Dean,
Yes.
Nick Burnham,
Yes.
and myself, yes. That is 13-0. The proposal passes. Thank you, Nick. Okay, it is 6 o'clock. We have a choice that we need to make. We can either grab a quick bite to eat before we move on to the next item, or we can move right on to the item. Is there preference to the board? No? Move on. So Commissioner, if you want to introduce the next item on the agenda as the 2026 revision.
Great, do that for you, please.
Yep, that'll make that.
Great. I'd like to introduce our fish biologist, Judge Kessler. I think John's very.
Good evening, everybody.
Evening.
Yeah, so we'll move into the fish rules that are up for second vote. And I was asked to give a quick update on all that the board voted on first vote back in January, because I understand there's some new board members. So we'll try to go through all of these very quickly and focus on some of the ones that are more controversial, namely the panfish and commercial fishing rules. But to summarize the bait fish rules first. All right, so there are several rules under bait fish, which is 141. One of the rules had to do with clarifying that the harvested bait fish may be transported alive or dead from waters, given the other constraints that are in the rule. There was an increase to minnow trap size from 18 inches maximum length to 24 inches, and an increase in opening diameter from 1 inch to 2.5 inches. The purpose of that was, well, the purpose of the first one was just to make things more clear. The purpose of this one was to give people the opportunity to catch larger bait to use for fishing for larger fish. And we did a study and confirmed that that would not increase risk to non-target species. The next one had to do with allowing the harvest of bait fish from seasonally closed waters when trout season is closed. These are mostly rivers and streams, which are good places to catch bait. But the way the rules currently are, you can't fish a minnow trap in those in, say, November or December when you're trying to get fish for ice fishing. So we also, in that study, we confirmed that fishing traps in those rivers and streams at that time of year does not increase risk of catching trout. And so we proposed that, and the board took first vote on that one as well. All right, the board voted to add language that minnow traps should be checked at least once a week. The board voted that fish eggs may only be used on the same water where they were collected, as people are using those for steelhead generally. The board voted to eliminate the time of sale and angler's signature from the bait fish receipts, and to language that allows someone that does not have a bait fish endorsement, which you need the bait fish endorsement if you're going to catch and use your own wild caught bait on different waters. So this revision allows someone to fish with someone that has a bait fish endorsement and use their bait even if they don't have it. So, you know, the person with the bait fish endorsement has the bait, lets other people use it while they're fishing with them on that water body. Just making that clear. And then to eliminate the carbon copies and the requirement of bait shops to keep those receipts because we haven't really been using those. So that's the summary of the bait fish rules. Are there any questions on those? We did not receive many public comments on these, so that's why I wasn't going to spend a lot of time talking about them. The department is not proposing anything different on these. All right. Next, we'll summarize what the board voted on first vote for trout, related to trout. Most of these were in 122. The first one was to add Mud Pond in Hyde Park to the seasonally closed waters list. So that means that it's only open to fishing from the second Saturday in April through October 31st. The reason for that is because we discovered a few years ago that we have a wild brook trout population in there, which we don't have many ponds in the state that support wild brook trout. And when we do have those ponds, we like to protect them from ice fishing. So that's the purpose of adding Mud Pond to the seasonally closed waters. The next one was to add a portion of the Deerfield River to the trophy trout streams. So that's basically a 2 trout limit. That's what that means. That stretch of stream. It currently has that rule as a test waters designation. This is just making it a permanent rule. We're stocking larger 2-year-old trophy trout there. And that's how we manage those sections where we're stocking those larger trout with a 2 trout limit. Next up is Lake Memphremagog lake trout, where the board in first vote voted to decrease the daily limit on lake trout from 2 to 1 and increase the minimum length limit from 18 to 20 inches. The main reason for this is to match Quebec's rules. Most of Lake Memphremagog is in Quebec, including pretty much all of the year-round trout habitat. The lake trout do come south of the border in the winter a bit. And Quebec is actively trying to restore lake trout natural reproduction there. They're stocking the lake trout. We've been working with them on salmon and steelhead, which is what we stock. And so we're working together with Quebec on the management of that lake. And so we want to match their rules with that. And then the next one is 16 stream reaches that are currently closed to fishing from the second Saturday in April through May 31st to protect congregations of spawning rainbow trout or rainbow trout that are moving to spawn and concentrated in areas. What the board voted on was to start that closure March 16th because we know we have rainbow trout in the rivers earlier than the second Saturday in April. And now we do have catch and release fishing year round in most of these places. So this provides protection for those fish. Again, not a new closure, it's just starting it earlier. Those are the water bodies where this what took the vote. Again, not new, just starting the closures earlier. And then the last rule related to trout is deleting 124. This is it's a closure on Valley Brook, which is a tributary to Seymour Lake. It's closed to fishing in the month of October. We believe that was put in place to protect spawning salmon. We don't really have spawning salmon in there, and we don't need this regulation to protect trout in this water, so eliminating it simplifies rules. We did have some comments during the public comment period. You made those in the responsiveness summary, but yeah, we don't have any concerns about needing that rule to protect trout in that stream. And I believe that's it for the trout rules. Any questions on trout? And again, the department's not proposing anything different with those. All right, moving into panfish. All right, there's 2 main rules in this one. The first one had to do with Stiles Pond and Berlin Pond, which currently have a test waters rule in place with a 10 yellow perch limit per day. And that's currently the rule. We put that in place to protect the yellow perch in these ponds, which were known to have big yellow perch because they hadn't been fished in a long time because these are drinking water supply waters. People started fishing them around 2012, 2013. We put this rule in place as a test waters to protect that large size structure. It's been successful. And so the board voted to make this a permanent board. All right, then next in the panfish is, I will spend more time talking about this one. And this is panfish creel limit, which would apply to inland waters. So everything but Lake Champlain. And here it shows what the current rules are. We have a minimum length and daily limit for crappies, a daily limit for yellow perch, and no limits for the other species that we would consider panfish. And the proposed rule is here. It would be, and this is what the board took first vote on, a 50 fish limit total for panfish with no more than 25 of each of the species that's listed there. You'll notice that white perch is crossed out, and I'll talk more about that in a bit, but the department's proposing that we delete white perch from this limit. So essentially what this does is no change for crappies, decreases the daily limit of yellow perch from 50 to 25, and decreases the limit of the other species from no limit to 25. All right, and so I put this up here because one of the things during the public comment period was a criticism that this isn't based on, that this recommendation isn't based on data. And I think it's probably related to a misunderstanding of what counts as data. So what we're talking about here is managing a fishery, which consists of three parts: the fish, the habitat in which they live, and the people. And when we're managing fisheries, it's best to be able to consider all three of those. When you're talking about regulations, definitely the fish part and the people part is more important than habitat. But even in this one, habitat was important because we're proposing this rule for inland waters, not Lake Champlain. Lake Champlain, bigger water, bigger population of panfish. So we're only proposing it for inland waters. But when you're talking about fishing rules, yes, biological data is important, but in a lot of cases, the social data, what people want and what people are doing, can actually be more important in some cases. So I will present a little bit of data related to this rule. And we'll start with the social data. And you saw this in the responsiveness summary. One of the reasons we wanted the board to take the first vote was so that we could collect some more social data through the public comment period. And of course, this is just the individuals that are motivated enough to either come out to a meeting or send an email or phone call. But there was good support for the proposed limits from individuals, and you can see that there was a few organizations there that commented as well. Another piece of important social data has to do with fishing effort, the amount of effort people are spending fishing for these different species. These data come from our statewide angler surveys, which we do roughly every 10 years, going back to 1990. And this is the number of days spent fishing in that year for these different species. You see yellow perch there is popular, has been popular. It's one of the more popular fish. People spending time fishing for them. Bass is up there as well and staying pretty consistent. It's interesting though, you look at the trout and walleye, we're seeing a decline in effort through time. But notably, the only place where we see increasing effort is with sunfish and crappies. So there's actually increasing effort, increasing pressure on these species. Another thing that we'll put under social data is technology. Technology has been advancing for a few decades. A lot of people are using fish finders now, but now we have this forward-facing sonar, which is really just starting to catch on. And we know that this makes fishing better. That's why people are buying this stuff and using it. But there has been at least one study done on it, and they confirmed that yes, technology helps people catch panfish. So we have increasing effort and new technology that's making it easier for people to target these fish. Moving on to the biological data, there's been a lot of studies done in other states where panfish have been more popular for a longer period of time, especially the upper Midwest, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan. And I'm not going to go through all those. I just wanted to highlight this one paper here from Wisconsin where they had data going back to 1944 for a bunch of different species. And they found that there of 5 game fish species that were more actively managed. And they were specifically lake sturgeon, largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, northern pike, and sauger. That size structure stayed pretty stable from 1944 all the way to 2012. On the other hand, they had 4 panfish species: bluegill, green sunfish, yellow perch, and black crappie, where they saw a decline in size structure over that time. And they said that this was at least partially because they did not receive the same management attention as those other game fish species. And so it's worth looking at what other states are doing. You can see Wisconsin there in the lower right. That rule that Wisconsin has currently went into effect in 1998. So near the end of that study period, I should say. But yeah, this gives you an idea of what other states are doing. These are all northern states and nearby provinces. You'll notice that Maine is definitely different than the rest of them. They consider most panfish species to be trash fish, and that's the way they're managing them. The one they don't is white perch. They love white perch, and so they are managing those. But the rest of them they have no limits on. All right, and in Vermont, bringing it to Vermont, we don't have the benefit of data going back to 1944 on any panfish species. And we have not been able to do studies like they've done in other states where they've had multiple water bodies that were closed to fishing for a time. They let people start fishing them and they document the decrease in size structure of those populations. We haven't been able to do that. What we did on Berlin and Stiles Pond is we put the 10 perch limit because we didn't want that to happen. So yeah, we weren't able to document that because we actively protected them. What this is showing, this is called a box and whisker plot. The main thing to take away from this is that the higher the box is, the bigger the yellow perch are in that population. And so these are a bunch of different links where we have data. I changed the names to protect the innocent. I don't want to draw attention to these waters. But what I'm doing here is highlighting the waters where we know we have low yellow perch harvest. So that's Berlin Pond and Stiles Pond. We know we have low harvest there because we have 10 perch limits in place. There's also these 3 that I call difficult access ponds. These are ones that are hard to get to. They don't have public access. One of them is behind a locked gate most of the year, so they just don't get fishing effort. And then the other one I call Trout Pond 1, where we know from creel surveys that people are going there to fish for trout. They aren't really targeting perch, but when we sample perch there, they're big. So these waters that we know have lower harvest of yellow perch have bigger yellow perch in them compared to the other waters that are just kind of like, normal access, normal levels of harvest. You can see I did put Memphremagog and Champlain on there. So you can see where those are. All right, so to summarize on, just briefly summarize the comments and for recommendation on this one, we had comments that were, wait on data, and it's, specifically, I think people were interested in biological data. So yes, we received comments on that, but then we definitely received a lot of comments that were convinced that we should act now. And the department recommendation is that we be proactive and we implement these limits now to protect what we currently have, especially in light of increasing effort, increasing fishing pressure, and advances in technology. All right, and then yes, we do recommend that we delete white perch from the panfish limit. And this, mostly this is because of public comments that were received. And really, if white perch were in this limit, it would only apply to 2 lakes, Lake Memphremagog and Parker Lake in the Northeast Kingdom. We know that fishing effort or fishing harvest of white perch is low in these waters. We don't really need this rule to protect them. So we're okay with taking that out because of the public comments. I will note that the way the rule currently is, it matches New Hampshire's rule very well. This would differ from New Hampshire's rule. Not that big of a deal, but I just wanted to point it out. All right. Would you like to focus on that one, or should I continue with into commercial fishing?
Are there any questions so far with what let's go with the latest section that you went over. I have a quick question relative to the yellow perch. It wasn't many years ago, and I don't know what the exact amount of years are, but there were no limits on yellow perch. And we went from 100, or excuse me, no limit down to 50, I believe. And if I recall correctly, that was done more from a social perspective than scientifically driven. And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just going on what I recall hearing. And now we're going from 50 down to 25. I mean, it seems like a lot has happened quickly with yellow perch. And we're almost getting to a point where it may not be worth someone going out fishing for perch if they, some people where I live drive up to Newport to go fish for yellow perch, which is a half hour away, 45 minutes away. And it starts becoming not worth the time to even go out and fish for perch. So I'm just curious how we went from no limits to 50, now down to 25. And what has happened so dramatically to cause that change?
Yeah, so Eric, did it go from no limit to 50?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. We might be showing our age. It was back in the mid-90s that happened. And it was concerns about overfishing. A lot of concerns about, frankly, it was about the Canadians coming down and taking our fish away in gunny sacks was kind of the way it was being portrayed. At the time, the department did not strongly recommend changes to regulations, but the legislature told the board that they felt the board should create a regulation or it would be done by statute. Board created a regulation for a 50 perch limit on inland waters. And I can't remember for Lake Champlain, it was a higher number and it was a weight. It was the equivalent of a 5-gallon bucket full of perch. And that lasted until the early 2000s. I think it was around 2003, 2004, that the limit on Lake Champlain was removed by the board, but the 50 perch limit on inland waters continued. And so, yeah, this would be the first proposed change for inland waters since that 50 fish limit was created in the late 90s.
So just to make sure I understood you correctly, though, so the concern was that there was an impact on the fishery and the yellow perch, but was there? And I know socially, people were thinking there was, and the legislature also must have thought that there was, plus the Canadian issue. Or was the department concerned? Because if they didn't initiate it, then it mustn't have been a concern.
The department didn't initiate it. We didn't have biological data indicating a decline in yellow perch, age structure, size structure. We have a better way of aging perch now. At the time we were using scales, which are good out to about 7 to 10 years. When we started using otoliths, which is the ear bone of the fish, we found that we did have much older perch than we thought, which does suggest that they could be overfished more easily than if they were real young, rapidly reproducing, dying at 7 years old. We have perch, I don't remember the oldest perch we have, but we have perch in, getting up into their 30s. I think 36 was the oldest one we've aged. So we've got more information now than we did then, but yeah, we did not recommend the change. But when it was the choice of having it done by statute versus by the board, we felt that the board is the appropriate body to regulate perch fishing.
And so the purpose for going from 50 to 25 now, or be a little clearer on what that is?
Yeah, so we know from work done in other states that 50, a limit of 50 is too high to protect size structure of yellow perch. And I think our data that I showed there suggests the same. What I can't say for certainty is that going down to 25 is going to protect size structure any better than 50. But what I do know is that 50 is too high based on what's been done in other states. If we want to protect size structure, which we do.
We have a size structure issue.
Well, I think, that's why I showed this. And again, with all the water bodies that we have, that's not a huge amount of data, but that's what we have, and it shows that in places where we have lower harvest, we do have bigger size yellow perch, better size structure in those waters.
But does this factor in the fact that we have, what we're hearing on the commercial side of things is that we have fewer people hunting, fewer people fishing, and at least the ice fishing season is shorter than it used to be. And so there seems to be less pressure, at least during the winter, than there has been historically.
Well, for yellow perch, again, this is the number of days spent fishing. There was a drop from 1990 to 1999, but since then it stayed pretty consistent.
Not broken down between open water and ice fishing.
Right, this is everything.
What season is the majority of our yellow perch caught? Would you say ice fishing?
I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with the up to date on the creel surveys that have been done year round on water bodies. Okay, Lake Memphremagog. Yes, Lake Memphremagog is the one creel survey that I'm familiar with. And there was definitely more yellow perch harvest in the winter than in the summer. Yeah.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, your data is based on fishermen reports, surveys,
Which data are you asking about?
any of the data presented, I guess. There's a lot of data that you
Yeah, sorry. So this is from a survey that goes out in the mail every 10 years. This is from netting surveys. The size structure.
So the department does that.
Yes. And we do have other data from creel surveys as well, where we're actually going out and interviewing anglers as well.
Those
Things, what kind of netting are you doing?
This one. I think this was trap nets and gill nets together, I believe. I think that's where this came from.
Gill nets would kill the fish. And
often, yes.
Most would that target large? Would that target different sizes depending on the sampling technique? No.
I mean, we might miss the really little, but for anything that anglers would catch or be interested in, it covers the range of sizes. Yes.
So in your angler surveys, I'm just curious, like 6-inch total length fish, do people actually keep? It just seems really small.
Right. Are you talking about yellow perch or?
Well, anything, but.
Yeah, so one of the questions in that statewide angler survey is what's the smallest fish you would consider keeping? And I don't know off the top of my head. I believe that most people want to fish a yellow perch that's 8 inches or bigger. You recall that, some people will keep down to maybe 7, maybe even 6, but most people are wanting, if I remember.
So my question is that if we were to approve this 50 down to 25, I'm going to focus just on a perch. How are you going to measure, or how are we going to know whether or not this was successful? And whether or not we could go back from 25 to 50? What are you proposing in terms of keeping this regulation in place for a specific period of time? And how do we measure the success of it?
We are in the process of, yeah, the early processes of collecting being more systematic about collecting panfish data. We really only started about a year or so ago. So we've got some waters that we plan to sample a little more heavily and get those kind of be like our, I don't know, sentinel waters or places that we really kind of focus on around the state, and then going and, year sampling here, 1 year sampling here to get an idea of what we have in other places as well. So we're at the early stages of starting to collect some data that would be applicable.
And so are we in a dire situation? Or are we just in a situation where we're starting to pay more attention to this? And do we have time to spend the next 3 years, the next 5 years collecting data? And make a much more informed decision 5 years from now versus today, where we have very, very limited data.
Yeah, well, I don't know, one way to think about it, one way that I've thought about it, and I think maybe you folks can too, because I assume you're all, or at least one or the other. But, I'm guessing you probably have a favorite hunting spot or favorite fishing spot, and you don't want other people to know about it because if other people are fishing there or hunting there, it's not going to be as good for you. And so, we could find all of those secret spots that everybody has, or those spots where we know we have good panfish, and then get people to fish them and see what happens, and then we can look back and say, yeah, I guess we should have done something, or we can be more proactive now. And so that we're recommending that based on increasing effort, especially for sunfish and crappies, technology, which that combined, that's, yeah, a combination which we think is likely to just continue on the trend that we're on, where I do believe, based on this, that we are seeing an effect of harvest on size structure of our panfish.
What do you think of the idea of instead of a 50 fish limit, but 25 per species? Say somebody wanted to catch 25 yellow perch. 50 yellow perch or 50 or whatever. Have it an aggregate or not limit it to 25 per species.
Yep, that could be an option. Again, as I said, we know that 50 is too much to protect size structure. Again, we're not certain that 25 is going to be any better, but 50 it certainly would be the same for yellow perch. It would be an improvement on sunfish going from no limit to 50.
Maybe the judge, you say there's a 36-year-old perch. To me says that perch produced an awful lot more perch. And we're having an issue? I guess I'm confused on that. The distinction is that if you're managing a species that reproduces very quickly and doesn't live very long, you can harvest a lot more of those in any given year. If you are instead have a species that lives for a very long time, like a lake sturgeon or an elephant, that you harvesting a lot of those will fairly rapidly deplete the population. Or what you'll end up with is this change in how the population behaves, where they start maturing younger, growing faster, trying to compensate for that harvest. And it's like K-selected versus R-selected species. There's lots of studies on these. But with something like lake sturgeon or lake trout, they can live a long time. We put much lower bag limits on those.
My biology lesson of the day, do perch reproduce pretty fast?
Narrowly though, or are they one of the, like a lake sturgeon? That takes a long time.
36 years, that's comparable to like a walleye. So it's not that they don't reproduce a lot. You know, there's questions about how successful the reproduction is and so on, but if they're living that old, then having higher harvest can affect things like size structure more easily. If the perch is only 5 years old, then, hey, you take them out of there and something else is gonna replace it really quickly. If the big perch are in their 20s, then that population might not respond as quickly to grow fish back into that higher size range. So it's not that you won't still have a lot of perch, but they might not be as big if it's taking them that long to get to be.
So perch are slow growing, then I guess.
They,
I
no, I know you're asking good questions and it
I,
by water body.
okay.
So the more food, generally, the faster perch grow. We created the panfish team a couple years ago to start looking more consistently statewide at age and growth, population size structure, those sort of things, so that we can better detect, you know, what's going on in different lakes around the state. My statement was more that we used to think that perch were really young and fast growing. And then we started aging them in a different way that's more accurate. And we realized, oh, no, some of them are really old and slower growing. So that means that they're more vulnerable to these sort of size structure changes from harvest.
I guess that was my point. That would have been, as a layperson, that would have been my,
Yeah.
waterborne, a lot live to a certain point, they're gone. High turnover, so to speak.
Do we know at what age they start reproducing?
I believe it could be as early as age 2. It all depends on how fast they're growing. So if they're growing faster, I think at least the males could probably start reproducing when they're 2. Maybe females might wait till 3. A little bit slower growing population, maybe they wait till 5, 6 years. But somewhere in that range.
Do we have an idea of percentage of fishermen that are going out and targeting yellow perch that are hitting their daily bag limit?
Again, the creel survey I'm most familiar with would be Lake Memphremagog. And I did look at that and that was 2018 through 2020. And I'm gonna roughly estimate the numbers. They were low. I believe it was like less than 10% of anglers that we interviewed reached their. In fact, actually, no, what I was looking at was how many of them hit 25. And that might have been less than 10%. It was low. The number that even hit 25. The percentage.
How often did they hit 25?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to explain. I think that's what I was actually looking at. I could dig into that. It's a low percentage. I know it was at least less than 25%. I think it's less than 10%. That's what we looked at, and that's just Lake Memphremagog. So yeah, just there. I don't know what it'll be like on other waters. Yes.
Well, off topic, but you mentioned twice impacts of technology. Is that a concern for you? It's just, is there some point, I mean, this is a bigger issue I think about, well, more hunting, but fishing till tonight, but technology getting too much, or what point do we limit it?
Yeah, I've thought about it.
I can respond to that a little bit. It is a concern. It's not a new concern. There's better and better technology every year. Some of this stuff, people are paying tens of thousands of dollars to get these forward-looking sonar units. So it gives you an advantage for sure. We had a conference of the 13 Northeast states last week, and there was a discussion among the other fish chiefs about this new sonar technology. And part of the discussion was it's really hard because it's not like a giant jump in technology. It's been this long continuous expansion of technology getting better. To regulate it becomes difficult, not impossible, but as far as where you draw the line as to what's too much technology. And the consensus of the fish chiefs was, we don't need to manage the technology if we manage seasons, bag limits, and size limits well. That's what protects fish populations. That even if you have the best technology, if you can only catch a certain number of fish, you're still limited by that.
Like the average angler who doesn't have money or is actually work
And
hard.
it's still fun. I mean, they have these huge video screens now, and you can see individual fish, and you can see how they respond to your lure. So it's almost like playing a video game out on the water. And they've actually had concerns about distracted drivers, that the boat drivers are driving around watching these big screens. I mean, it is a change. It's different than when I went fishing, different than how I still go fishing for perch. But again, despite some continuous improvements in technology, going back to basics of bag limits, size limits, and seasons is still our best way to manage fish populations.
I'm kind of wondering about your comment about regard to next state or question about the 25, your surveys that said you saw 25, 10% had 25 fish. Was that 25 perch or was it 25 fish?
It was yellow perch.
This proposal, 50 fish total. You only had, it seems like almost like non-issue kind of to me. I don't know the way I'm looking at it, like if 10% of the anglers caught 25 perch, did they have another 25 bluegill or bullhead or crappie in their creel, or I don't know. That's a question that
Yeah, and keep in mind, I'm just, using Lake Memphis Magog as an example. It's gonna almost certainly be different other places. Just trying to see if I could find that, but.
I drive by Styles Pond quite a bit for my job, and I see, I think this year I probably saw 5 fishermen out there, and I went there probably 5 times, a total of 5 fishermen. So I don't know. That's another question, is what kind of pressure are these bodies of water getting for these number of fish to put these limits on them for me?
Are there, possession limits? Well, how many, like, you catch 50? Put them all in your freezer, or are you done until they're gone?
I'm gonna let a warden answer that one because I'm always a little confused about that one myself.
So the daily limit is just that, it's your daily limit. So it doesn't apply to the water. Was that the?
No, it's if you have them in your freezer.
Oh, so technically possession limit is the number of fish you are in possession of in your freezer.
Is that twice the daily bag limit, or would you?
For fish, yes, it's different for different species, but yeah, that does apply to your house and your freezer. That said, we're not going and looking in every freezer. No, and I don't know if you have further insight, but typically what it's to address is when individuals are eating excessive amounts of game or another mechanism by which that issue basically. That's how it's been utilized.
Aren't these bag limits also apply to commercial fishermen? So part of it is like, not just people going out for their own that we're talking about. We're talking about the commercial.
Yeah, it'd be everybody, yeah.
But they're only required to stick to general bag limits.
And that's what that limit is per person. I mean, if you got 3 people out there, you can catch, you know, 3 times 25 for yellow perch.
So one of the reasons that the board decided to move forward with this was to hear from the public and hear the public's take on these proposals. And just looking at the summary, the responsiveness summary, you know, their vast support for the panfish harvest limits. I don't know, you remember kind of the broad strokes of those comments of why people supported them or why they were opposed?
Yeah, you could kind of dig into that. If you look at the later pages in the response to this summer, you'll see people said, I've seen over harvest affect the population. The fishing's not as good as it used to be because of being overfished. Fishing is better in other states where they have more protective regulation. Things along the.
I see, yeah. Page 6. Thanks.
I have all the confidence in your department when you put together, the scientifically driven data. It's always so easy to follow the data and understand the data. And I don't know, some of the data comes to us. It's just so easy to follow. I'm having a really hard time understanding here, driving this. Need to move from 50 down to 25. And I'm talking about specifically yellow perch. I mean, I have no problems personally with the total daily catch limit of 50, but it's just limiting it to 50. And I might be wrong, but I think yellow perch is one of the more popular fish that are caught during the winter in most of our.
Most popular.
Correct. And I think it's having a significant impact on a lot of people who fish during the winter. And I speak about ice fishing. I know they fish the rest of the year too as well. I have a hard time imposing a rule change without the data to truly support it. Sounds like we're more attempting to try to get out ahead of a situation that may or may not be an issue. Especially with the data that you gave us about Magog, and with so few people already catching the limit. There are a handful that probably do catch 50. But it just seems like we're addressing an issue that isn't quite an issue yet. I'm not grasping that's an issue. So I'm struggling whether or not to act on something now or wait till we have more data that allows you to present us a much clearer picture of what the challenge is and what the solution is and how we're going to measure it that's successful. And I'm personally just not there. That's why I'm hung up.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Do you have a picture in your mind of what data you would want to see, like specifically what data you would want to see that verifies or confirms that this is the right move?
Well, I don't know if it's fair to you or not, but Nick just got done giving us a presentation on some well-established benchmarks of whether or not we're hitting those antler size antlers or the weight at a yearling. It's easier to get access to that data, possibly, I'm not sure. But it's well-established data and it was presented in a way that was very easily understood. And so the equivalent of that, whether we have a better way of aging the fisheries today, if we had more data on the age of the fish that we're catching, the quantities that people are catching, and which bodies of lake, which bodies are really the problems. I mean, is it the majority or is it just a handful? I'm not sure of that. I'm having a hard time implementing a change statewide that may not be an issue. We'll go right here first.
Yeah, I attended 3 of the hearings and I've spoken to a number of people about the issue. And I've actually written down quite a few comments and questions and concerns that people have, so I'd just like to go over those. The biologist stated in February that selling of fish is a social issue, not a scientific one. Comment. Anglers indicated there are less people fishing now than in the past. And this is validated by the number of pounds that are recorded annually. Sale of fish also been down in recent years due to the lack of ice. Everybody acknowledges that. Anglers also asked why burden some with an endorsement of paperwork when they may sell fish only once or twice a year, as some do. Anglers who sell their fish in New York would not be documented. Therefore, there's no way to collect accurate data on fish marketed, the fish market average. And many anglers will not indicate their fishing spots, as we've heard tonight. It was stated by many people that cormorants eat about a pound or more of fish per day, having much greater impact on the fishery than anglers do. It's true, but that's what they indicate. Many anglers stated something needs to be done to control the cormorants. Question was asked, what evidence is there that anglers sell fish limits to more than one fish buyer per day? If most anglers don't sell fish, why is it important to know who does? Some people also bring fish from other states to sell here, so documenting those purchases have no meaningful purpose for what is caught here in Vermont. Some anglers indicated that panfish are often smaller in size due to overpopulation. Kind of hearing the opposite here tonight, but a lot of anglers say this. This is the belief of the owner of Norm Bait and Tackle in Crown Point, New York, which I stopped there yesterday and spoke to Norm. Norm stated that when New York limited the catch of perch on Lake George, the perch are now smaller. Norm currently sells fresh fish at the request of local residents. So just thought that was important for people to know. This regulation would also have a negative impact on restaurants offering local fish or organizations for holding a Friday night fish fry. North American model was introduced about 125 years ago when there were no laws to regulate market fishing and hunting activities. It was necessary then. And from my view, the model is outdated and doesn't consider modern day fish and wildlife regulations. Fish and wildlife resources are now abundant and healthy with rules that are reviewed on frequent cycles to make changes as necessary. Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department was established in 1897. Since that time, regulations, conservation, and science has proven to be a major benefactor of our fishery. With no evidence of harmful effects on the fishery, I fail to see the merits of supporting panfish limits of 122 or selling a fish at 123. I do support 124 and 141. Thank you.
Thank you. David, did you have a comment or a question?
A comment. First off, the local chapter of Trout Unlimited in this area of the state endorsed the draft that was put forward. So understand that there are some groups that understand the importance of upholding the North American model of game is not for sale. It just amazes me that anyone, if we allow a 50 fish creel limit under the regs, as I understand them, you can have 2 days worth of creel limit fish on your person. I guess one has to be in the vehicle or a cooler or something like that. And I just don't understand that number of fish being taken at one time by a person and then sold as being appropriate. In terms of the North America model, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies endorse that model. We in the state of Vermont are part of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. So in fact, we have already endorsed the model, which asks as a goal that we do not put a price tag on wild game, that it should be available to everyone under control of the state. And in terms of data, we have an entire state of people out there hunting deer, doing deer checks, checking in. We have bears' teeth. We have the hunters checking in terms of the data that we generate for big game hunting. The fact is, we do rather, we do it to the limits of the ability of.
I think you muted yourself, Dave.
Come on. Am I back on?
You are.
Okay. We have hunters that do check in their kill, and so we're able to generate data. We get fishing data from creel surveys, and that is we do as best we can. I'm not being critical at all of the department in terms of not looking and seeing what is in every single creel of every single fisherman statewide on all the waters of the state. So of course we do not have as detailed data that we have on deer and other big game. I do not find it daunting in terms of making a decision to drop the limit. And, based on studies that have been done, peer review studies that can be relied on, that indicate that without some level of control, you do not have the fishery that you desire. So I do hope the board will move this rule forward as is. In the interest of our fishery statewide. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Well, if I could just remind people, I don't believe that we've gotten to section 123, commercial fishing. We really have been talking about section 122, which is the limits that are outside of commercial fishing, that are just personal bag limits, catch limits for the day. So it's just a reminder of that's really what we've been focusing on. So, okay.
Can I ask you a question, Brent? You seem to be concerned about the yellow perch limit specifically and not any of the other species that are being proposed. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, like I said, I think it is the most popular fish that is fished at least again during the winter through the ice. And it's is generally has I think a large impact on Vermonters who are fishing. And my concern is implementing a rule that we don't know whether or not it's solving an issue or not. That's my concern. Not having enough data to validate that there is an issue. We're really trying to be preemptive, I think, with anything, because other states have. So that's my concern of how and whether or not it's dire enough that we need to act now versus collecting a couple more years worth of data so that we can make a much more informed decision on changing a rule that has such broad impact. That's where I'm coming from.
I have to say, I do share Brad's struggle with this. 25 fish perch limit, that's not a commercial fishing impact only. That, the average fisherman, that's pretty low limit for an ice fisherman to go out. 25 perches. The average guy, trying to get some fresh food, that's a pretty low limit. Understand it's inland waters only, but that's an impact on not just commercial fishermen, but the average guy.
Like to see more information from other waters. There more data from other inland waters. I'd like to know if predators have been put into your data. Predatory, like cormorants.
Yeah, so all we have is, I showed this, I've got a few other slides that are later on that I have, put down lower in the interest of time. We could look at those. I've got one that's similar to this for pumpkin seeds. I've got some data, a little bit of data from our angler creel surveys, and a little bit of data from our master angler program, but they're all the same flavor as this. As I said, we can't go back decades like they did in Wisconsin. And we haven't had the opportunity to show like they've done in other states where they have a population that has not been fished at all for a long time. And then people start fishing it under their general rules and they see the population size structure decline. That's what they've done in other states. Those types of studies might take 5-10 years. So it's not going to be like a quick thing, as you said, a couple of years of data. It would be a lengthier study before we would get to that.
I do want to point out the cormorants are almost exclusively a problem on Lake Champlain. We have cormorants elsewhere, but as far as large populations, it's a Lake Champlain issue. And we are not proposing any changes for Lake Champlain bag limits. So I know folks are saying, well, maybe it's cormorants and not anglers, but as far as this proposal, there's no changes proposed for Lake Champlain bag limits. The only one would be when Judd gets into the crappie proposal, that would be statewide and would include.
So, I'm new to the board, trying to wrap my head around some of this. You talked about earlier, I think it was Lake Memphremagog. Limited data you have showed that about 14% fishermen for yellow perch were getting 25.
Yeah, that's what I looked up. It was 4% of people hit 25.
What percent? So, I mean, what percentage are actually getting 50?
Very low.
Very little. So it's.
I find that surprising.
But it's almost like we're talking about something that's a moot point. If only 4% are ever getting to 25 fish.
That's on that lake.
On that lake, but
yeah.
That's a popular.
That's one of the bigger.
Yeah.
Lakes that are one of the bigger issues. Yeah.
I mean, where the wardens go, we lost all our wardens, but
I don't go out of the office much, but I'll do my best.
people out there checking all the time on that lake, and I wonder what they see for limits,
Anecdotally, I mean, I was the Burlington ward for a number of years, and I was down in the Poultney district for a number of years, and there is certainly a very select group of people that day after day target pan. What impact that has, that's not my job to say, but there is no doubt that there are individuals who day after day, and I mean, quite frankly, I enjoyed talking with a lot of them. They're usually pretty good guys, and they tried to come up with really annoying questions to stump me, but they also had usually pretty good coffee, so. But they are out there. They were out there every day. Every day I went out, they were out. There's no doubt there is a select group that is very aggressive in pursuing the pan fishing.
When did you collect that creel data? I mean, if you go out there on the ice, it's gonna be a lot of people have 50. Gonna have a limit. Go out there in the summertime, there's probably gonna be very few. I mean, is there
That was the whole year. Yeah, it was the whole year. It was 2 years. We started December 2018 and went through 2020. and it was winter and open water.
Okay, can I suggest that we, before we get beyond what we've already, we've got 4 different sections here that you're making a proposal on, changes on 4 different sections.
Yep.
Before we get to the commercial fishing, change proposal, I would recommend as a board, we vote on the others and one as section at a time. And get them behind us so that we don't forget everything that we had as a conversation on those.
I would second that.
So, it's already getting a little confusing. We're incorporating commercial fishing into, daily limits. Can you put back up on your screen, the different sections and each section, so that we have a kind of summary of what we're addressing?
So it's not a commercial.
Is this what you were referring to?
Yes. So did you have a summary up there of what 141 covered? Again,
Well, I had 2 slides of that. I can go through that again.
just so that we are okay. So right there. And,
There was this slide and the next one, so these are all related to harvesting panfish and use of bait fish.
before we vote on 141, does anybody have any questions relative to this section of the rule? If not, can I get a motion from somebody to,
Make a motion.
Oh, Mr. Chairman.
excuse me, Dave?
Yeah, the bait fish rule was put in place because of a disease of fish. Has that abated now in terms of the sort of moving out from the point of taking bait fish out of the water and allowing it to be spread throughout a watershed? Because when we put this in place back in the day, and I was there when it was, there was reason to fear the hemorrhagic virus that was affecting fish in other locations, and we really did not want to spread that.
Oh, I can respond to that in part. So the bait fish regulations have been around for decades, going back to at least the 60s. But they were originally regulations that restricted what gear you could use to collect bait fish. It was about seine sizes and minnow traps and that sort of stuff. Sometime in the late 1990s, we found alewife in one of our inland waters, Lake St. Catherine, and the bait fish regulations were made more restrictive as to what species you could use. So it came up with a short list of approved bait fish species to prevent people from moving invasive species around like alewives. And then as David said, in 2008, there were changes related to a nasty fish disease called viral hemorrhagic septicemia that spread through the Great Lakes really rapidly, killed like 26 different species of fish. Scuba divers were saying that the bottom was just white with white bellies of dead fish.
Yeah.
And so we'd never detected it in Vermont, but we passed some very restrictive regulations on bait fish movement, on all fish movement, fish importation, but for bait fish, saying you can't move it from one water body to the next. That was 2008. It's been almost 20 years. VHS has not been causing those kind of dramatic fish kills in the Great Lakes or elsewhere, and we haven't detected it in Vermont. So over time, we have slowly relaxed the bait fish rules. You know, it's a risk benefit analysis. Okay, what can we do to protect the resource? Try and, do what's right for natural resources, but also provide angling opportunities. And so each time that we've opened the bait fish regulations since 2008, we've made them less restrictive. And that's the case once again here, is that we're allowing slightly more movement. We're allowing movement of eggs. People can take them home, take them back to the same water body. The minnow trap size adjustment, that's not anything disease related. That's related to the fact that bait dealers are not selling the large suckers that they used to sell to people like we used for catching northern pike. And so this would be a way for people to potentially catch those on their own now. So it's been a series of changes. We think that these, again, it's that risk benefit analysis. We think that these changes are appropriate in balancing risk and opportunity.
Thank you.
That's kind of long-winded, but I hope that
No.
This is what-
I'll tell you, when we were doing that, that VHS scared the bejesus out of me.
Oh, out of us too. We hated making those restrictive regulations. We hated it as much as the anglers, which it's ironic. Most of our employees are really avid anglers, so we feel the pain too. Judd probably catches more perch than anyone else I know. That this is not in his self-interest to limit perch.
So anyhow, with that explanation, Mr. Chairman, I'll just say for the board, I support these changes.
Okay, thank you, David. Okay, so you were just starting to,
Yes, I would, I could move the bait fish rule 141.
have a second?
Second,
Any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of the proposed changes to section 141 of the bait fish rule? Let me take a roll. Bob Patterson,
Yes.
Neil Hogan,
Yes.
Allison is absent, Linda Hook,
Yes.
Jeff Corey,
Yeah.
Beth Dimling, Ricky Craig, Ryan Kilburn. Yep. Paul McClellan. Yes. Artie Van Buren.
Yes.
John Valsan, Jack Mo. Yes. David Dean,
yes,
Nick Burnham. Yes. Yes. Okay. Those changes passed 14-0. Thank you. Okay, the next section, let's go to section 124. Pop that up.
That's all it is, 124.
Any questions on this particular section? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept 120.
Do I have a second?
second,
Okay, any further questions? Hearing none. Okay, I'll take a roll call vote, and the motion is to accept those changes for section 124. Bob Patterson,
Yes.
Logan,
Yes.
Linda Hook,
Yes.
Jeff Corey,
Yes.
Beth Dimling,
yes,
Richard Craig,
Yes.
Brian Kilburn,
Yes.
Paul Noel,
Yes.
Artie Van Buren,
Yeah.
John Valsan, Giacomo, yes, David Dean,
yes,
Nick Burnham. Okay, and myself, yes. It's 13-0, the motion carries. Thank you.
12.
Excuse 12, yes, you're right. And the other one was actually 13. Right, yeah, Allison is not here. Okay, then we move to section 122.
Just to be clear, section 122, we've broken up into the trout regulation changes, and panfish bag limits are also in 122.
Okay, do you have them broken out?
Oh, sorry.
From for the board, you can, obviously debate the sections of the question, but you'll be voting
The entirety of the section?
the whole,
Okay.
all of 120.
Behaving weirdly. There's the route rules in 122.
Are there any questions relative to the trout portion of the changes? Hearing none, on to the next section 122.
I'm sorry, the screen has gone completely white and I did not hear any of that conversation leading up to what you just said, Mr. Chairman. Sorry.
Okay, we're reviewing section 122, which contains both the trout, proposed changes to trout fishing, as
Right.
well as the daily aggregate limits and fish. We're not talking about commercial fishing yet. And we're going to vote on the entirety of this section 122. So we were just being presented the trout piece of it first, and there were no questions relative to the trout section. And now we're moving on to the daily aggregate limits section of portion of 122. So that's where we're at.
Okay, so there's this Styles and Merlin Pond one, which is separate from the general.
Did I have any questions relative to Styles Pond or Berlin Pond, Styles Pond?
I guess this probably is the best slide to summarize the rules for inland waters other than Lake Champlain.
Any questions relative to this section?
That includes black and white crappie, right? You just got crappie.
Yep. And remember, we're proposing that we take out white perch.
25 of each 50. You get total, so you get 25 yellow perch. I'll concede if you want it.
So I would like to make a motion. I think this is, I don't know if this is procedurally correct or not. Anna, you can probably tell us, hopefully. My only concern with this is the 25 daily limit for yellow perch. And what I would like to propose is a motion to change that 25 and have it maintained at 50.
I'll make that a motion.
Can I say currently, before I do that, currently, the daily limits on bluegill and all the other panfish, are they set at 50 as well too, or
No,
they're all 25?
No,
currently there's no limit.
There's no limit. There's a limit on crappie. There's a limit on perch currently, but there's no limit for the other species in that list. This would create a limit.
25, all those,
The proposal is 25 on all of them.
50 total aggregate.
Right.
Yeah, so the current limit on yellow perch is 50 for inland waters. This only applies to inland waters in the proposal. So this would be a change from 50 down to 25. The current limit on crappie is 25, so this would be no change for crappie. But for all the other species, it would go from unlimited to a 25 fish limit as it's currently proposed.
With a 50 fish maximum.
With a combined aggregate bag of 50. So if you got 25 perch, you could only collect 25 of all of the other ones combined. Yeah, 50 fish total aggregate bag limit. I hope that makes sense to everybody as far as what we're saying for 50 fish total. So if you increased perch to 50, then that would mean that other language doesn't change, that somebody with 50 perch could have 0 of the other species.
Could change it to be an
Or it
aggregate.
could be a combination of anything, but not to exceed 50 of yellow perch. 45,
Right, you-
40, whatever.
Yeah, no, and you can nuance the wording. I just want to make sure to understand how the aggregate bag limit would work.
So my motion that I was going to start would be to, end that proposal to have within that aggregate of 50, the ability to catch 50 perch.
But again, like we don't want to say then you can't catch any of the other panfish. Is that,
Well,
yeah. That would, I think that would be sensible.
How do you go from no limit to 25 on all the other species? No limit to 25 without nothing there. It's kind of a question. I don't get it.
As I understand it, it's a matter of the section on Lake Champlain has been taken out. And now this applies to all the waters of Vermont, the inland waters and Lake Champlain.
No,
Yeah.
not Champlain.
My thought process would, if I do finalize that motion, we currently have a 50 fish total on perch, yellow perch in inland waters. Then bringing all the other panfish up to that limit.
He's at 25, right?
Or it's with the exception of crappies, yeah. Is the concern equal across all types of panfish? Or is it just primarily yellow perch or not sure?
Yeah, I mean, we see this as being more protective of all of the species than what we currently have. To make that move protective of all of these species.
And as I read this under the proposed language, Lake Champlain still has no daily limit for bluegill, bullhead, pumpkin seed, rock bass, and yellow perch.
Correct.
That's correct. Only for crappie.
Which just for me, I find that astounding. That someone would impact a resource with that many fish taken. But that's me. So anyhow, Brad, I think you got your 50 fish.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm not sure that any particular motion is necessary. And I'm confused about the motion. Is the motion to approve section 122 as presented?
It hasn't been, I haven't really finished my motion yet, to tell you the truth.
Oh, okay.
I have been more focused on yellow perch. That's where my focus has been, not on the rest of the panfish. We currently have a limit of 25 on crappie. And the question is, for me, the 50%, 50 fish total works for me, even with the other panfish. So I think my proposal would be to change that to maintain a 50 fish limit, but to allow with the exception of crappie, it's just a 50 fish limit. Any combination of those not to exceed 50, with the exception of crappie, which stays at 25. Is there a reason to stay at 25 and not 50 for crappie?
Yeah.
And because,
Well, again,
is it different than the rest of the panfish?
yeah, they are, of the panfish species, they tend to grow a little bit faster, can get bigger. So in general, they are managed more protectively than the other species. That's why we even have
We also changed our regulation to match New York's for Lake Champlain. They'd like us to go to 10 inches instead of 8, but right now that's why we have 8 inches and 25 fish, and we made that statewide.
I would make a motion to adjust that recommendation to maintain a 50 fish total with, not more than 25 crapping, but with a 50 fish total for all the other panfish. Opposed to the 25%, limit of each species.
Still maintain the 50 fish total.
Second.
I do not understand the motion. And, Mr. Chairman, I would like to see it written out and circulated before we voted on it.
Could we just vote on on this section the way it is?
Yep. Okay. Yep. Fair. Okay. I will withdraw my motion. And I think we have a motion over here.
Sure, I will make a motion that section 23, is it?
122.
122 be accepted as it is.
Second.
Okay, any questions?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a second.
A question, but it was more towards the one that was withdrawn, but I guess I'll ask anyway for the department. If it was 50 just total, you can get 50 yellow perch or 50 any other panfish except crappie, would that have concerns for you, or would that satisfy what you're trying to at least get to, Greg?
I think it would be a step in the right direction. Frankly, part of our concern is what that Wisconsin paper suggested, that by not having any regulations on their panfish species, they realized over time that there'd been some negative impacts on size structure. Going from no bag limit to 50 would still be a step towards being more conservative.
Eric, I'd like to correct that a little bit. The rules in Wisconsin before 1998 were actually 50.
Oh, really? So they were seeing those population changes with 50.
They
All
had
right, well, that's
50
good.
fish limit from 1965, I believe, to 1998. They were seeing that decline through that time. And 1998 is when they put in the 25 fish limit.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second on the floor to accept the proposal as presented for section 122, which includes the 3 different components of it. Any further comments? I will just say that I'm probably going to vote, I am going to vote against it because I don't like the yellow perch limit of 25. That's my whole issue. So we will take a roll call vote. Robert Pattison. No. Neil Hogan.
No.
Wilson Frazier. Not here. Linda.
No.
Jeff Corey.
No.
Beth Dimling. Richard Craig.
No.
Brian Kilburn.
No.
Paul Noel. Marty Van Buren.
No.
Don Valsian Giacomo.
Yes.
David Dean.
Yes.
Nick Burnham.
Yes.
And I'm a no. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Those 2, 3, 4 yeses. So that motion doesn't carry.
For 5 yeses.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2.
Person absent. One before.
No, but you had,
Oh,
both
Dean.
Dean.
9-4. We're missing one person.
I heard Linda say she was in favor, but
She said
I said no.
said no, my problem. Anyway,
So the motion is 9-4. We have a motion to amend that.
We could, take 5 minutes to draft what you're proposing so that the board members have a chance to look at it. Understand correctly. You're proposing. And you wouldn't need a motion to do that. I could draft it and then you can.
So
Right, but yeah, I would need to see it in writing because I do not understand the distinction you're making. You want 50 fish, it says 50 fish. So,
but you're limited to 25 of one species, David. That's the issue.
and that's a hell of an impact on any given species. Particularly if there are a lot of people doing 25 fish. But
Hey, why don't we take a quick break? Why don't we go eat dinner, quick lunch, and we'll come back with the language.
All you have to do is just say.
well, Mr. Chairman, I
think, propose some changed language.
I think you proposed some language that she could capture.
Aired some change. Thank you. You're right.
Objective on this. But there was a request from the board to draft some language. And I hope that we've captured it here, but we've made the same change in 3 different spots. This is the first table, just represents statewide aggregate daily bag limits. So what it previously said for the panfish was 50 fish total, 25 of each, and it listed the species that are struck through here. We've changed it to say 50 fish total, no more than 25 of which can be black and white crappie. Meaning you could catch 50 bluegill. So
50 perch.
50 perch, right. And so let me know if this does not accurately reflect the request that the chair made.
It does reflect what I was attempting to say.
Okay, good. And so the change was made in 3 different spots, same language, but we also made the change to the table, sorry. Where these panfish bag limits are articulated as well. Similarly, the language previously read 50 fish total, no more than 25 each of the listed species. Struck through that, now it's 50 fish total, no more than 25 of which can be black and white crappie.
Okay, so you can still take 50 bluegill or pumpkin seed.
So it's still an aggregate bag. So as soon as you catch one bluegill, you can only take 49 of the other species.
But there's no 25 limit on any.
Only on crappie, which is always been there.
What's been there?
And the changes made in one other spot here. This is also amended language because we are adopting the yellow perch limit on Berlin Pond and Stiles Pond. So again, it was already in here, 50 fish total, no more than 10 of which can be yellow perch. And we are just adding in the language from above that no more than 25 of which can be black and white crappie, eliminating the limit for the other panfish species. Striking.
Eliminating the 25 limit and bringing it up to 50. for those other species. Those were under that special regulation, the test water. Previously, there was a 10 perch limit. Ever since those were kind of open to fishing.
Yeah, and I do want to clarify that the 10 yellow perch limit is highlighted because I amended the language, but the board at this point there has not been any debate about that adoption of the 10 perch,
Keeping the
yellow
10
perch
perch.
limit. Ponds. This is really, I'll just leave this on the screen. This is really encapsulates what the proposed change is for the board's discussion.
Questions on the proposed language changes? David?
Well, I find it interesting that members of the board think that the fish in our waters, albeit they are the same species as those that were studied in the study that we have at our disposal, would, at a population level, react differently than the species, the same species that were studied. I cannot make the connection. That is science, and we all know the results of an overstressed population of fish or any other animal. But if that is not sufficient to encourage members to vote against this and return to the original motion, I would like to bring the precautionary principle into the conversation. And for those of you that are not familiar with it, precautionary principle is a concept in environmental studies and laws and public policy that suggests taking proactive measures to prevent harm, even when scientific certainty about the risk is incomplete, is an important protection. It essentially advises that acting better safe than sorry when faced with uncertainty of potential serious threats. And I would argue that the limit as proposed in this amendment does in fact continue the harm to certain species, particularly on inland waterways, because Lake Champlain has not had any limit placed on it in any draft that has been in front of the board. So I would urge members to vote this motion down and go back to the previous motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Any other comments? Okay, do I have a motion to accept the language as proposed? I can make the motion to accept the language as proposed.
Yeah, second.
Have a second?
Wait, can I clarify? Are you voting on this change or the rule in its entirety?
Well, I think based on what you had said earlier, I think we have to vote on the rule in its entirety.
The board will need to vote one way or another on the rule. I want to make sure that that's what you're doing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, just to clarify, the motion is to vote on the entirety of section 1T2
As amended.
as amended, with this language here in particular.
Mr. Chairman, a question?
Yep.
And I'm not to you or to legal counsel or to whomever. This would significantly change the wording in the proposed rule as first circulated. Is it in order to continue with this kind of change, or do we need to make that change and begin the rulemaking process again? Because I think this is a significant change. I think it's out of order to do it at a board meeting after the first version has been circulated.
The board does have the opportunity, but after the public comment period and during the public comment period, to discuss changes that do not substantially modify what was proposed. And what was proposed was a change to daily bag limits for panfish. I believe this reflects a reasonable change that can move forward without a second public comment period occurring.
Based on my experience, I disagree with that analysis, but I am not counsel to the board.
I understand it. The only thing we changed was 25 fish per species, but we went from, got the 50 limit. And prior to this, other than crappie, there was no limit, right? So the change, it was substantial change was setting the aggregate, setting the limit at 50, and we were setting at 25. We just changed it to 50 other than crappie. So
Perch was at 50.
perch was 50 before, so sorry.
In crappie, yeah, everything else now has a limit.
Everything else was unlimited, so we now put the limit on it, so. Seems to me to be in the spirit of. Just and the aggregate limit hasn't changed.
Any other questions?
I just want to make sure that my objection is on the record and in the minutes.
So noted. Okay, hearing no other questions, I will take a roll call vote on the motion to accept the section 122 as revised with the language proposed. Those who are going to be in favor just will signify by saying yes, and opposed say no. Robert Patterson.
No.
Neil Hogan.
Yes.
Allison Frazier. Absent. Linda Hook.
Yes.
Jeff Corey.
Yeah. Yes.
Beth Steinling.
Yes, I'd like to go back to the first proposal, but we're not going there, obviously. Compromise.
Richard Craig.
Yes.
Brian Kilburn.
Yes.
Paul Noel.
Yes.
Artie Van Buren.
Yes.
John Valsin Giacomo.
Yes.
David Dean. David, are you muted?
Yeah, could be. No.
Okay, thank you. Nick Burnham.
Yes.
And Brad Ferlin, yes. 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's 11 yeses. And
I'm sorry. I'm a no vote, Mr. Chairman.
that's correct. I have 11-2. Is that what you got, Abigail? 11-2, motion carries. Okay, now we move on to the last section. 23. Okay, commercial angling rule, 123. All yours, Judd.
Thank you. Right. Commercial fishing rule. All right, and there's a couple parts of this. One of them is the sale of crappie. In the first vote, the board voted to prohibit the sale and purchase of crappie in the state. And as you saw in the responsiveness summary, we summarized the individuals that commented. And we had A lot of people that were in favor of this move, some that were opposed, and a few organizations that commented in favor as well. As a reminder, the reason the board proposed this was really because of law enforcement. Crappies have a higher dollar value per pound than the other species. And even though they're a small proportion of the total sale by weight, they're a much law enforcement challenge. Because of that higher dollar value, we have people more inclined to go over the limit. We have cases where people are bringing crappies in from other states where the sale of crappie is illegal, so they can sell them in Vermont. We also have crappies being introduced into water bodies. We know since 2008, we have at least 30 populations of crappie that have been established since 2008. And yeah, we don't know for certain the motivation of those folks, but there's a good possibility at least some of that motivation is to establish new populations to sell. And in our comments, of course, there were people that commented that we should maintain the status quo. They wanted to continue to be able to sell crappies as is. Some proposed that the wardens just work harder to enforce the rules that we currently have. And then on the other hand, we had a lot of people that commented not only should we prohibit the sale of crappie, but that we should prohibit the sale of all panfish. So the department proposes that we continue as the board voted with what the board voted on first vote, which we believe will help to alleviate some of these law enforcement challenges. Remembering that this is only 4% of commercial sales by weight, helps our law enforcement, also is a compromise between some of these groups that actually want us to end all commercial fishing and those that want to continue to do it. Next, under the commercial fishing rule is the fish seller's endorsement. And again, here's the summary of comments received, or at least individuals that commented. Again, good support for this. And this basically requires anyone that wants to sell fish in the state to have a fishing license and seller's endorsement, which would be free. The fishing license would not, but the fish seller's endorsement would. The department suggests that the board can keep that in for second vote. We do recommend one change, and that's related to fish sellers reporting. 5.5 was added in before the first vote, which would require people selling their fish to report to the department. The department proposes that the board delete that for the second vote. In response to public comments, that this data is redundant to the fish buyers report, complaints that it would be burdensome, questions about the reliability of the data. And also, when you look at the Rule 123, Section 4.2 already gives the department the authority to collect information from these folks. We haven't been able to do that because we didn't know who they were. The fish seller's endorsement allows us to know who these people are. So, and that 4.2 gives us the opportunity to collect information from them. So 5.5 then in a sense is redundant. And so that's why the department proposes that be deleted for the second vote. And yeah, that's it for that I have for 123.
Any questions for Judd?
Some of the literature that was mailed to us, I saw like a law enforcement report, like about violations concerning broken down, right? Like
In the responsiveness summary, I did put some numbers in there. Since 2021, I had one of the wardens look back. And as far as the number of cases, which I don't know exactly how that's defined. If you have a question about that, the wardens can. But as far as actual cases where they actually were able to do something about overfishing, since 2021, there were 8 cases of overlimit for trout, 4 for crappies, 0 for other species. And all of the crappie cases were commercial fishing related.
but for in what time period?
Since 2021.
That does not sound like a epidemic of violations.
So the same warden told me that last year he had complaints. So they get a lot of complaints, but those are the number of cases where they're actually able to catch someone and go through the whole, whatever that process is that would make the case. That's my understanding. And that's one warden that had over a dozen complaints. So other warden having that as well. Yes.
I looked pretty hard for other freshwater commercial fisheries, and of course, there are commercial fisheries on the Great Lakes, specifically Lake Erie is a commercial fishery, but Lake Erie is huge compared to Lake Champlain. Is that so Vermont is really unique in that sense, correct? Is
We
that-
are pretty unique. I put this up here. This is our neighboring states. And it shows what their rules are related to freshwater commercial fishing.
I'm sorry, is that supposed to be up on the team's page? Because it is not.
Could you stop sharing your screen? And are you sharing your screen, Judd?
Yes, I am. David, I will stop sharing and try resharing and see if it comes up for you.
Okay, thank you.
It's gonna make me click through all these again. There's probably some way to do this, but I don't know it. Do you see it now, David?
Now, all I see is the full board and all its splendor.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Okay, please move on.
Well, just to give you a summary, David,
You have the wrong camera.
what,
Judd, was this shared? I don't remember if this was.
Oh, these slides were in.
you know, most of the other neighboring states have allowed no sale of freshwater fish. Some of them allow sale of some species. New York is a little bit different from the others where, for example, they're not allowed to sell crappies from New York, but they can buy crappies that come in from Vermont.
My other question is, also from other information I've seen, Vermont waters are really the only place in the United States that provides where you can buy crappie. So Vermont crappie end up shipped all over the country essentially.
As far as I know, most of the crappies that are on the market are coming from Vermont. Now, Maine, with their rules, you could sell crappies. I talked to their freshwater commercial fisheries biologist, and he said, yes, they can sell crappies, but nobody is buying them in Maine currently. So.
So can I, if I'm looking at New York's regulation, sale of species with a season or length limit taken in New York is prohibited. Sale of certain species taken outside of New York is allowed. So would this create a situation where New Yorkers are coming to Lake Champlain and catching an unlimited amount of crappie and selling them in New York?
Are you thinking under the current rules or what's?
Well, I'm looking at New York's rule. It sounds like, I don't know what sale of certain species taken outside of New York
Have to come from.
are allowed to be sold.
I think I can kind of clarify it. In that a number of states up there, they say game fish. And in New York, what they said is, again, if it has a length limit or a season, it's what they would call a game fish, and you can't sell that. There are other species you can commercially catch and sell in New York, and they allow some species, if it comes from a state where it's not considered a game fish, because that state doesn't have a season and, you know, a bag limit or length limit to be sold in New York. So it's kind of like they say, you can't do it in New York, but if the other state allows it, we'll allow it also. So So again, New York, it's not that you can't sell any fish commercially, but if it has a season or a length limit, then it's prohibited for commercial sale. Which includes crappie already. So you could not catch a bunch of crappie in Vermont and sell them in New York.
So it looks like Maine doesn't say, or doesn't prohibit sale of panfish. It prohibits the sale of black bass, landlocked salmon, pickerel, lake trout, white perch.
Right.
Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah. So you could sell them. What Judd heard was that there aren't commercial fish buyers in Maine. So
Or the panfish species.
for those panfish species, yeah.
So just to be clear, are we positive that New Yorkers can't come to Vermont in Lake Champlain, catch crappie, sell them in New York?
They currently can.
They currently can. And
Because of Vermont's allowance for commercial sale of crappie.
so, okay, so the reason they wouldn't be able to is if we changed our laws here.
But they wouldn't,
But we're not, what law are we changing? There's just the fact that, based on what your proposal, the fact that you can't sell them in Vermont, you can still catch them legally in Vermont.
Right, you can catch them, but you can't. I can't remember, does it say purchase or sale? The 123, let me,
List of species prohibited for sale and purchase.
okay, sale or purchase.
But that covers us to prevent New Yorkers from coming here and catching crappie and selling them in New York, is what you're saying. I'm just curious, do we have other rules, Fish and Wildlife rules around fish and game that we have changed so significantly as a result of our ability to enforce them or our challenge in enforcing them? Or have we adjusted our enforcement procedures?
we have a number of rules. It's a lot of spawning water closures, areas that we've closed entirely to fishing because of the enforcement challenge with those locations when fish are especially congregated. For a while, the Lower Clyde River was walleye snagging, but I expect a number of places like the Salmon Hole and Winooski River that are closed because it's just so difficult to force the regular fishing regulations if that was open.
Questions? Is there anything you guys heard during public comments that gave you any pause about doing this?
If anything, I was surprised by how much support there was for the proposed rule and even going beyond it, to where people were saying you should just stop all sale of all panfish, not just crappie. That was surprising to me.
I guess one of the major prompts there to ban crappie sales was enforcement issues. Those were on top of your slide, one of your previous slides, and I don't know, I guess I have a problem with realizing a large group of people for the bad behavior of a few. That's never usually a good idea. Again, only 4 incidents in 4 years. There might have been more complaints, but people can complain a lot. Doesn't mean what actually happened may not be what they're complaining, what they're saying, but so my point.
you have any idea how much fish is sold in Vermont? How much of these fish are consumed by Vermonters?
Are you asking how many are sold or how many consumed in Vermont?
You know, more
Two separate.
of the companies that buy the fish, the buyers, how much of it ends up in Vermont
Oh,
versus out of state?
well, I can't answer that.
It's impossible. Part of it from grade seafood and such gets sold to processors in Canada, so then it's.
Where it ends up, who knows?
Yeah, so these are numbers that we haven't updated with 2024 yet. This is pounds of fish harvested.
Right, but it doesn't tell us
Doesn't say
where
where
they
they
go.
go.
Right. Yeah.
The commercial fish buyers are required to report on the pounds they buy and by species and by water body, Lake Champlain versus inland waters. But there's no reporting requirement for what happens to fish after that.
At the hearing in St. Albans, there was one former bait fish buyer who was retired that said that a number of years ago, this, compared to now, they're doing like 10% what they did 10 years ago. Out of the shop that he owned, sold to somebody else, so it was way less. Some of that's because of the fishing in the wintertime, not having the ice to catch them.
Is there any concern that this is gonna create a black market for crappie?
Well, walleye is a popular fish to eat. I don't know that there's a black market for them in Vermont, but you know, it'd be similar thing, like you could get some money for walleyes, but I'm not aware that that's an issue.
The state feel it's having a negative effect on the population.
Well, this is primarily a law enforcement
Strictly a enforcement issue.
with very good public support based on what we saw in the public.
I would just add to that 150 people were commenting nothing when you look at the population of the state, so I don't give that a lot of weight myself. We don't know where those comments come from.
Part of what I'm struggling with is that, for the last meeting, we talked about, you know, the reason. We asked a lot of questions and there wasn't a lot of information about, you know, how many people are fishing, how many people are commercial fishing. And so there were the buyer's reports, but there was some, my word, lack of confidence in those reports. Is what I heard, whether that's what was said or not, that's what I heard and understood. And so part of creating that seller's endorsement was to start getting a better handle on the whole industry. And kind of reconciling that process. And yet it is a little bit more work, but it does give us a lot more information in the long run of who's, how big is that industry? And with someone with a seller's endorsement, you now have a kind of an enforcement tool that you didn't have before, where you can pull that endorsement if you do have bad characters that are causing issues. So it seems like we are moving away from that and kind of moving away from it entirely. So it was I was hoping that endorsement would kind of slowly get us to where we were and we had more information. But
I just want to make clear, we're not recommending not doing the endorsement.
no, I know that. No, I know.
The
Yeah.
reporting, as it was originally described, we're recommending striking that language.
Right. But the reporting part was to give more validity to the data that you do have. You know, it gives you that reconciliation opportunity that you really don't have today. You'll have you have one report. from the buyers, but anyway. Guess if we ban it, we don't really need it.
Well, yeah, and 4.2 that's currently in there gives us the opportunity to collect that. So,
Any questions, anybody?
Is there currently today a limit on crappie?
On Lake Champlain?
yeah, for the entire state, it's 25 fish, eight with an 8-inch minimum length.
So I guess I don't know what I'm talking about. But, so is that like is this a big deal? Like because we don't have like to Brad's point, I think we don't really have a number of people that are actually selling fish. If we have a 25 fish limit across the state, is that really a big number at the end of the day? Even if you fish every day, I don't know. You know, you're not catching? I saw some data about it's sold by length of fish for inch fish is $1.50 or something. Is that $25 or $50?
It's sold by the pound, I believe.
By the pound, or was it by the? By the pound. Okay. Just wonder if there's like the big money thing, or if it's just like a hobby pastime, or if it's.
I don't know the answer to that. I know that I've heard numbers from dollars that flow through that whole process. And it is big dollars, I mean, in its entirety. You know, how many people are selling fish? I don't have any idea. If it was only 10 people that were doing it, I think that would be quite a significant amount of money, but I don't know if there's 310 people doing it or 1,000 people doing it. I have no idea what the numbers are, that are doing it.
I actually have an article from themeateater.com talking about crappie and crappie fish sales in Vermont. They're talking about crappie is the least poundage of all of them, but it's annual average of 16,800 pounds. Total panfish, according to this article, sold are 732,000 pounds per year, annual average. Not a small number.
I asked this earlier, but what makes the enforcement difficult versus all the yellow perch and everything else that's being sold?
Well, main thing is the crappies have a higher dollar value. So it's a higher incentive to push those limits to get more money. Crappies.
But it's the least amount of fish being caught and sold out of all those.
Is it true there's only a certain window of time to catch crappies? It's not year round.
My understanding is that, you know, a lot of people get them in the spring when they're concentrated. But yeah, I mean, people catch them in the winter as well. And you can get them through the summer, but yeah, the spring seems to be the time.
Well, John just stepped out, so we're gonna give him an opportunity.
Those poundage numbers came from an article
Yeah.
from Meat Eater. Can the department verify those numbers?
Those numbers came from the department.
Which in turn came from the commercial buyers reports.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what Judd has up there in the graph is those commercial buyers reports kind of tabulated by year. By species.
You know what the total dollar value is percentage wise? We talk about 30% of the market dollar wise, or?
Yeah, I don't know. That's why I speak in terms of pounds, because to get the dollar value, you need to know what they're going for, which I think changes at times. So you'd have to kind of track that.
It's actually on here. You want for crappie?
Yes.
crappie?
Yeah, it's curious what percentage of the,
Annual average of 51,977.
Just under a mil. This one here.
This is the for,
Crappy.
that's for several years, that was 18 years. So total panfish payouts. It's an annual average of $732.
That's what they did.
7 hours.
That's adding all
Right. Yeah.
crappies are right here.
Our department hasn't tried to track the dollar values, in part because it does change, based on, they'll put a sign up and what they're paying that day. It changes based on the size of the fish. It's not just yellow perch are the same. There's, premium for larger fish, and it's what they call round weight. So it's not fillets. It's just you bring your fish in whole, they pay per pound. So we haven't tried to do those calculations other than in very round numbers, a few times as to what the going price was one day and how much was reported for that year, but nothing that we would that was reliable. That Meat Eater article may have talked to fish buyers themselves to get those dollar values.
So I feel like maybe my point was trying to get at what Brad was saying about the seller's endorsement. Like if we don't have, and I guess it kind of is the same thing, but if we've got, 100 people with a seller's endorsement and 10 of them are selling, 100 pounds a season or a year, and the other ones are only selling, a couple pounds, and with the number of respondents to these questions, that's where I'm trying to get my head to is what, again, is it a problem? Is it problem is this is.
one of the pieces of information that was presented to us was I think during the first meeting was the survey that was taken. And how many people identified this as an issue? Recreational fishermen recognize this as and I can't remember what number you associated with that.
Yeah, it was 15% of resident anglers considered commercial sale of crappie as a significant or major or significant problem, I think is how it was worded.
15% just about crappie?
Yes.
Was there a percentage that were against the commercial sale of yellow perch, sunfish? What was that percentage?
Actually, I think I have it here. Yeah, yellow perch was 17 and sunfish was 13.
That comment really, I'll have to admit that prior to getting appointed, I had no idea this was my ignorance that I didn't know this would even sell. This was an issue, and that caused me to start looking in Green Book and trying to figure out, sales in general, like, okay, what about for big game? And you only can do it in the state during the season, 20 days. And so for me, I've been looking at this different perspective, like, why are we doing this? I've been having a hard time wrapping my head around it. I've been reading up on it the last 2 months, but I had no idea that this commercial industry was going on in Vermont, with them going out of state. I found it interesting that for big game, has to be within the state, certain time period. Anyway, I don't want to throw a big wrench, but that's why I've been struggling because I'm having trouble with the idea of even having this commercial. Then seeing what you put up on the board earlier about essentially our neighboring states, we're sort of lone wolf out there.
Any other questions? Thoughts? This is primarily a Lake Champlain issue. It's a question, I guess, and I'm with John. I didn't even know that we had a commercial fishing market up in the Northeast where I live, and the lakes that I live around. This isn't an issue. So I didn't realize how significant and how passionate the people are who do this, participate in this, are. And how passionate the people are that are against it, opposed to it, are as well too. So it's not a discussion that I have lived in ever before. So it's all very different for me. And I think John raises a good point of it can be a much bigger discussion. And that's why I asked earlier how much of this was going to from Vermonters and staying in Vermont, versus going out of state and moving our, fish out of state. It's just an interesting, I think, piece of information that would have been helpful, but it isn't available. So it is new. It's new to a lot of us that don't live in the Lake Champlain areas. Comment thought. So, does anybody want to make a motion?
Make a motion that we accept the proposal for regulation 123.
So this, just to be clear, this section does two things. It eliminates the commercial selling of crappie. Is that the correct way? That's
Purchase and sale, yeah.
purchase and sale of crappie. And two, it eliminates the reporting for those that have a seller's endorsement for the rest of the
So
fish.
But yeah, so what you took your first vote on included the fish seller's endorsement,
Creating the fish seller's endorsement.
creating the fish seller's endorsement, which we propose that you keep in. It added black and white crappie to that last point, that list of species that are prohibited for purchase and sale. There's some clarification in one of the last points about complete and getting complete information that's not falsified. And then there was 5.5, which the department proposes deleting because of public comment and because it's redundant to 4.2, which already gives the department the opportunity to collect information from fish sellers.
Is that clear to everybody?
But you can still sell yellow perch.
Yes.
And all the other stuff.
Yes.
On panfish.
Mr. Chairman,
Just a minute, David. Are you,
Yeah.
you're good? Okay. Go ahead, Dave.
the language in 4.2, anglers shall provide information about their commercial fishing activity to the department as required by the commissioner. And 5.5 sets out that the reports are not limited to pounds, et cetera, information on all species, and sets out a few parameters. The language in 4.2 sets out none. The commissioner could decide that he or she is tired that day and doesn't want to read any reports and says no information is required. And I think I think that reports shall include but not be limited to pounds sold for each size group by species should be added to 4.2, not simply delete it, so that there are some parameters in terms of what we will get for information, since the desire for information seems to be paramount this evening. So we have a motion, but I would like to amend that motion, as I have suggested, that report shall include but not be limited to pounds sold for each size group by species be added to 4.2.
Okay, I have a motion to amend the motion that's currently on the floor. Do I have a second to David's motion? I'll second it. Is everybody clear on what Dave is saying? He's just, I think, making the language consistent.
I do have a question, David, just to be clear. The language in 4.2 right now, as you've noted, states that anglers shall provide information about their commercial fishing and as required by the commissioner. I think what we need to say is that the commissioner shall require fish sellers to submit a report that shall include but not be limited to the pounds sold for each size group by species.
I agree with that language. It's better English also, but it does get to the effect that I was trying for.
I just want to clarify because without some specificity about a report, it still leaves it open-ended as to whether the commissioner would require that information.
Right, thank you.
I guess I'm a little concerned about that reporting requirement simply because we had so much pushback from the commercial fishermen. Like, are they gonna cooperate anyways? I mean, gonna get any cooperation from them?
Well, I mean, I think if it's part of the rule and it's required, then it's something that they have to do. If they choose not to, then that's a violation of the rule. But my reason for seconding that motion is that the motions that are on the table are really just to address the sale of crappie. And as we move forward, you know, if this becomes an issue where it extends beyond crappie, I want to have as much information. We should have, as a department, as much information, or the state should have as much information as they possibly can. Because it's very challenging making these decisions without information. And it puts us as a board, I think, in a very awkward position. So for that reason, I support that's why I seconded it. Even if, I don't care if it's deer hunters or fishermen or trappers, whatever, if we collect data that is helpful for our decision making, then we should do that. That was my logic for seconding it. So we have a motion and a second on the floor to amend 4.2. And it just, any other questions?
Following up on what you said about getting information. If we had 5.5 back in the rule, would allow us to compare seller's poundage to buyer's poundage. As a verification.
I think that was the original intent of the board. This was not in the department's proposal for first vote. The board added in the fish seller's endorsement and recommended that the reporting be similar to what the commercial fish buyers currently report, which is pounds by species, Champlain and inland waters. As far as being able to compare those two, part of the comments we were getting were, I'm not going to tell you where I caught my fish or how many. So the reliability of that data to compare it to the fish buyers, I think is a real question we would have.
If there's a significant difference, I think it would more investigation. Oh, you? I could see if a small variance. I don't know what that would be, statistically. But, again, it would give us more information. Is everybody reporting? I mean.
We are interested in getting more information. Don't get me wrong. We'd like the fish seller's endorsement to stay in there. The commissioner already has the authority to decide going forward what information should be reported. But it was the double concern of, hey, this would be, now as a commercial angler, I've got to do all this reporting, and it might not be worth the paper it's written on. And so as far as following up with law enforcement or differences between fish sellers and fish buyers, total numbers, we didn't think that was even possible, to be honest with you. We don't know how you would do that. So we're not opposed to the idea of gathering data. You know, the very first thing we would be getting from this is participation. How many folks are actually commercial fish sellers? Then we'll have names in our database. We'll have their addresses. We can follow up with them directly with surveys. We just felt that this kind of prescriptive language of matching up with what the commercial fish buyers are currently doing wouldn't give us reliable data. We agree completely with the board. We'd like better information. We didn't feel that 5.5 was necessarily going to get us there.
Okay, so before we move on to any other sections, I think we still have a motion on the floor relative to 4.2. And I have a second on as well too. So David had recommended language to be added to that, and Hannah, you stated what the language was. Does anybody need to hear that again? Want to hear that again?
Sure.
Okay, Hannah, can you repeat that again, please?
Sure. So 4.2, the first sentence would read as it currently reads. Anglers shall provide information about their commercial fishing activities to the department as required by the commissioner. Then we would add a sentence that says, the holder of a fish seller's endorsement shall submit reporting information to the commissioner that shall include but not be limited to pounds sold for each size group by species. To be clear, the way that is, the way I just read it would be a requirement for anyone with a fish seller's endorsement to report that information.
And we are still leaving fish buyers out of this.
Fish buyers are already required to report. They're 5.4. Current rule.
Okay. No more questions. All those in favor of the recommended changes to section 4.2 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Opposed. No, opposed.
Two opposed. So we have 11 in favor and 2 opposed. So the language was approved. The language changed in 4.2. Okay. Any other questions in general about section 123? No, excuse me. Have a motion on the floor now that it was amended. Beth, you had a motion on the floor to accept the proposal, the section as proposed. We amended it. It's now been amended. Now the motion on the floor is to accept the amended language as presented to us. And we have a second.
Second.
Are there any further questions or comments about the entirety of section 123? Amended. So all those in favor of accepting the language as amended?
Okay, okay, I got, hold on, I got confused. What's this vote on now?
The vote now is voting on section 123, which bans the sale of crappie.
But that was what we did last time.
No, that was amending just a particular section within the 4.2.
Are you switching, Mr. Not doing roll call?
I didn't on that particular one, but here where we're voting on the entire section, it will be a roll call. Just trying to at least. For midnight. Okay, so all those in favor of section 123 as amended, will say yes. If you're opposed, say no. Bob Patterson. Neil Hogan.
Yes.
Allison Frazier, not here. Linda Hook.
No.
Jeff Corey.
Yes.
Beth Daimling. Richard Craig.
Yes.
Brian Kilburn.
No.
Paul Noel.
No.
Marty Van Buren.
Yes.
John Val San Giacomo.
Yes.
David Dean.
Yes.
Nick Burnham.
No.
I'm going to be a yes. It is 8 yes and 5 opposed. The section passes as amended. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for that. Judd, thank you. Item on the agenda, we move to the commissioner's report.
I don't really have much to report other than, the last time I believe we were all together, we reported that, our fur bearer rule had made it through the court system. It has now been appealed, so it will move to the Supreme Court. You heard. No other information other than that. Thank you. Thank you all for your time and.
I have a quick question, and can we get an update at some point, or maybe the board could do it now? How did the and this was another part of the rule. How did the pounding season go for coyotes this past winter? In terms of or understand it, is that we having violations again?
The easiest way to sum it up would be relatively uneventful.
Okay, good.
Like a little bit. Yeah, we had one loaded gun, which would have been a violation in any other seasons.
Just a process note for the board, so we'll take these to Elcar, bring them back for third vote. Intend that the fish regulations would take effect January 1st of 2026, with the exception of the reporting requirement, because there would be nothing to report or people actually have an endorsement, so that would take effect the following year.
Any questions for the commissioner before we adjourn?
Good luck, turkey hunters.
Yeah. Getting up.
Yeah. 30.
Okay, I have a motion to adjourn.
Motion adjourned.
Okay. All right, all in favor? Motion adjourned.
Yeah.